Chapter 15 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 15. Sea Cows and Turtles' Eggs. The Forest. Peccaries. Indian Tribes on the Lower Napo. Anacondas and Howling Monkeys. Insect Pests. Battle with Ants. Barometric Anomaly. First View of the Amazon. Babish. The 30th of November was an exciting day on the monotonous Napo. We fell in with numerous sea cows sporting in the middle of the stream. They were greatly disturbed by the sight of our huge craft, and, lifting their ugly heads high out of the water, gave a peculiar snort, as if in defiance, but always dived out of sight when fired upon. The sea cow is called vaca marina by the Spaniards, peixe boi by the Brazilians, and manatee in the West Indies. It has no bovine feature except in its upper lip. The head and skin remind one of a large seal. In many respects it may be likened to a hippopotamus without tusks or legs. It has a semicircular flat tail, and behind the head are two oval fins, beneath which are the breasts, which yield a white milk. The flesh resembles pork, with a disagreeable fishy flavor. Today we anchored at several playas to hunt turtles' eggs. Our Indians were very expert in finding the nests. Guided approximately by the tracks of the tortugas, as the turtles are called, they thrust a stick into the sand, and wherever it went down easily, they immediately commenced digging with their hands, and invariably struck eggs. In 4 nests, whose contents we counted, there were 132, 114, 112, and 97, but we have heard of 160 eggs in a single nest. The turtles lay in the night, and in pits about 2 feet deep, which they excavate with their broad webbed paws. The eggs are about 1.5 inches in diameter, having a thin, leathery shell, a very oily yolk, and a white which does not coagulate. The Indians ate them uncooked. We used them chiefly in making corn griddles. Here, as throughout its whole course, the Napo runs between 2 walls of evergreen verdure. On either hand are low clay banks. No rocks are visible, and from these the forest rises to a uniform height of 70 or 80 feet. It has a more cheerful aspect than the sombre, silent wilderness of Baeza. Old aristocrats of the woods are overrun by a gay democracy of creepers and climbers, which interlace the entire forest, and, descending to take root again, appear like the shrouds and stays of a line of battleship. Monkeys gambol on this wild rigging, and mingle their chatter with the screams of the parrot. Trees as lofty as our oaks are covered with flowers as beautiful as our lilies. Here are orchids of softest tints, flowering ferns, 50 feet high, the graceful bamboo and wild banana, while high over all countless species of palm wave their nodding plumes. Art could not arrange these beautiful forms so harmoniously as nature has done. The tropics, moreover, are strangers to the uniformity of association seen in temperate climes. We have so many social plants that we speak of a forest of oaks and pines and birches, but there variety is the law. Individuals of the same species are seldom seen growing together. Every tree is surrounded by strangers that seemingly prefer its room to its company, and such is the struggle for possession of the soil, it is difficult to tell to which stem the different leaves and flowers belong. The peculiar charm of a tropical forest is increased by the mystery of its impenetrable thicket. Within that dense, matted shrubbery, and behind that phalanx of trees, the imagination of the traveller sees all manner of 4-footed beasts and creeping things. Tropical vegetation is of fresher verdure, more luxuriant and succulent, and adorned with larger and more shining leaves than the vegetation of the north. The leaves are not shed periodically, a character common not only to the equator, but also to the whole southern hemisphere. Yet there is a variety of tints, though not autumnal. The leaves put on their best attire while budding instead of falling, passing, as they come to maturity, through different shades of red, brown, and green. The majority of tropical trees bear small flowers. The most conspicuous trees are the palms, to which the prize of beauty has been given by the concurrent voice of all ages. The earliest civilization of mankind belonged to the countries bordering on the region of palms. South America, the continent of mingled heat and moisture, excels the rest of the world in the number and perfection of her palms. They are mostly of the feathery and fan-like species. The latter are inferior in rank to the former. The peculiarly majestic character of the palm is given not only by their lofty stems, but also in a very high degree by the form and arrangement of their leaves. How diverse, yet equally graceful, are the aspiring branches of the jaguar, and the drooping foliage of the cocoa, the shuttlecock-shaped crowns of the ubusu, and the plumes of the jupati, 40 feet in length. The inflorescence always springs from the top of the trunk, and the male flowers are generally yellowish. Unlike the oak, all species of which have similar fruit, there is a vast difference in the fruit of the palm. Compare the triangular cocoa-nut, the peach-like date, and the grape-like acai. The silk cotton tree is the rival of the palm in dignity. It has a white bark and a lofty flat crown. Among the loveliest children of Flora we must include the mimosa, with its delicately pinnated foliage, so endowed with sensibility that it seems to have stepped out of the bounds of vegetable life. The bamboo, the king of grasses, forms a distinctive feature in the landscape of the Napo, frequently rising 80 feet in length, though not in height, for the fronds curve downward. Fancy the airy grace of our meadow grasses united with the lordly growth of the poplar, and you have a faint idea of bamboo beauty. The first day of winter, how strangely that sounds under a vertical sun, was Sunday, but it was folly to attempt to rest where punkies were as thick as atoms, so we floated on. It was only by keeping in mid-river and moving rapidly enough to create a breeze through our cabin that life was made tolerable. A little after noon we were again obliged to tie up for a storm. Not a human being nor a habitation have we seen since leaving Coca, and today nothing is visible but the river with its islands and plains and the green palisades, the edges of the boundless forest. Not a hill over 100 feet high are we destined to see till we reach Óbidos, 1,500 miles eastward. Were it not for the wealth of vegetation, all new to trans-tropical eyes, and the concerts of monkeys and macaws, oppressively lonely would be the sail down the Napo between its uninhabited shores. But we believe the day, though distant, will come when its banks will be busy with life. Toward evening, 3 or 4 canoes pulled out from the shore and came alongside. They were filled with the lowest class of Indians we have seen in South America. The women were nearly nude. The men, there was only one, had on a sleeveless frock reaching to the knees, made from the bark of a tree called lanchama. All were destitute of eyebrows. Their hair was parted in the middle, and their teeth and lips were dyed black. They had rude pottery, peccari meat, and wooden lances to sell. Like all the Napo Indians, they had a weakness for beads, and they wore necklaces of tiger and monkey teeth. They were stupid rather than brutal, and probably belonged to a degraded tribe of the great Zaparo family. With Darwin, one's mind hurries back over past centuries, and then asks, could our progenitors have been men like these? Men whose very signs and expressions are less intelligible to us than those of the domesticated animals. Men who do not possess the instinct of those animals, nor yet appear to boast of human reason, or at least of arts consequent on that reason. I do not believe it is possible to describe or paint the difference between savage and civilized men. It is the difference between a wild and tame animal, and part of the interest in beholding a savage is the same which would lead everyone to desire to see the lion in his desert, the tiger tearing his prey in the jungle, or the rhinoceros wandering over the wild plains of Africa. On the morrow our falcon-eyed Indians whispered, "Cuche," long before we saw anything. Williams went ashore and came upon a herd of peccaries, killing 2. The peccary is a pugnacious, fearless animal. It is not frightened by the noise of firearms, and when wounded is a dangerous foe. But captured when young, it is easily tamed. It has a higher back than the domestic hog, and cleanlier habits, an odoriferous gland on the loins, and 3-toed hind feet. We preserved the skins for science, and a ham for the table. The rest we gave to our crew and fellow voyagers, who devoured everything, even the viscera. They sat up late that night around their campfire, cooking peccary meat. Part they parboiled in a pot, and some they roasted, skewered on sticks which slanted over the flames. The rest they cured with smoke, for lack of salt. The meat, though rank, is palatable, but not equal to mackerel, which we served up the next day. We had not passed the mouth of the Aguarico, leaving behind us the Christian Quitus and the peaceful Zaparos. Henceforth, the right bank of the Napo is inhabited by the Mazanes and Iquitos, while on the left are the wilder Santa Marias, Anguteros, Oritos, and Orejones. The Orejones, or big ears, enlarge those appendages to such an extent that they are said to lie down on one ear and cover themselves with the other. This practice is now going out of fashion. These Indians receive their names, Orejones or Oregones, from the Spaniards, on account of this singular custom of inserting discs of wood in the ears to enlarge them. The like practice prevailed among the tribes on the Columbia River, Oregon. They trade in hammocks, poisons, and provisions. The Anguteros or Putumayos have a bad reputation. They are reported to have killed and robbed sarsaparilla traders coming upstream. Nevertheless, we kept watch only one night during the voyage, though we always anchored to an island, and between Coca and the Amazon we did not see 25 men. Equally rare were the savage brutes. Not a jaguar showed himself, and only one anaconda. The anaconda or water boa, Eunectes murinus, is larger and more formidable than the boa constrictor which lives on the land. It has a hideous appearance, broad in the middle, and tapering abruptly at both ends. We did not learn from the natives that anacondas over 20 feet long had been seen on the Napo, but specimens twice that size are found on the Amazon. Land boas do not often exceed 15 feet in length. Gangs of the large howling monkeys often entertained us with their terrific, unearthly yells, which, in the truthful language of Bates, increased tenfold the feeling of inhospitable wilderness which the forest is calculated to inspire. They are of a maroon color. The males wear a long red beard, and have under the jaw a bony goiter, an expansion of the os hyoides, by means of which they produce their loud, rolling noise. They set up an unusual chorus whenever they saw us, scampering to the tops of the highest trees, the dams carrying the young upon their backs. They are the only monkeys which the natives have not been able to tame. Vast numbers of screaming parrots and macaws flew over our heads, always going in pairs and at a great height. Groups of gypsy birds were perched on the trees overhanging the river, and black ducks, cormorants, and white cranes floated on the water or stalked along the playas. But one form of life superabounded. From the rising of the sun to the going down thereof, clouds of ubiquitous sand-flies filled our cabin, save when the wind was high. As soon as the sand-flies ceased, myriads of mosquitoes began their work of torture, without much preparatory piping, and kept it up all night. These pests were occasionally relieved or assisted by piums, minute flies that alight unnoticed and sweating close to the skin, sucked their fill of blood, leaving dark spots and a disagreeable irritation. Our hands were nearly black with their punctures. We also made the acquaintance of the montuca, a large black fly whose horny lancets make a gash in the flesh, painless but bloodletting. All these insects are most abundant in the latter part of the rainy season, when the Marañón is almost uninhabitable. The apostrophe of Midshipman Wilberforce was prompted by sufferings which we can fully appreciate. Ye greedy animals, I am ashamed of you. Cannot you once forego your dinner and feast your mind with the poetry of the landscape? Right welcome was the usual afternoon squall which sent these pests kiting over the stern. On Wednesday we fell in with a petty sarsaparilla trader with 2 canoes bound for the Marañón. He was sick with fever. Sarsaparilla, written salsaparilla in Brazil and meaning bramble vine, is the root of a prickly, climbing plant found throughout the whole Amazonian forest, but chiefly on dry, rocky ground. On the morning of the 7th day from Coca, we passed the mouth of the Curaray, the largest tributary of the Napo. It rises on the slopes of the Lhanganati Mountains and is considered auriferous. It is probably derived from curi, gold. Seeing a hut on the banks, we sent an Indian to purchase provisions. He returned with a few yuccas and eggs. The day following we were attacked from a new quarter. Stopping to escape a storm, a party went ashore to cut down a tree of which we desired a section. It fell with its top in the river, just above our craft, when, lo, to our consternation, down came countless hosts of ants, ecitons. Myriads were, of course, swept downstream, but myriads more crawled up the sides of our canoes, and in 1 minute after the tree fell, our whole establishment, from hull to roof, was swarming with ants. We gave one look of despair at each other, our provisions and collections, and then commenced a war of extermination. It was a battle for life. The ants, whose nest we had so suddenly immersed in the Napo, refused to quit their new lodgings. As we were loosely dressed, the tenacious little creatures hid themselves under our clothing, and when plucked off would leave their heads and jaws sticking in the skin. At last the deck was cleared by means of boots, slippers, and towels, but had the ants persevered, they might have taken possession of the boat. Today we saw a high bank, called in Quichua Pucaurcu, or Red Hill, consisting of fine laminated clays of many colors, red, orange, yellow, gray, black, and white. This is the beginning of that vast deposit which covers the whole Amazonian valley. It rests upon a bed of lignite, or bituminous shale, in a coarse, iron-cemented conglomerate. The latter is not visible on the Napo, but crops out particularly at Obidos and Pará. The Indians prepare their paints from these colored clays. Our Santa Rosans seem to have little tact in fishing. Still, their spears and our hooks gathered not a few representatives of ichthyic life in the Napo. The species most common belong to the genus Pimelodus, or catfish tribe. Below the Curaray, the sandbars yielded turtles' eggs of a different kind from those found above, the tracajá. They were smaller and oval, and buried only 6 or 8 inches deep, 30 in a nest. December 9th. Passed early this morning the mouth of the Mazan, 4 huts at the junction. Today we noticed the anomaly first observed by Herndon. From Papallacta to the Curaray, the rise of the mercury was regular, but on the lower Napo there were great fluctuations. At one time, both barometer and boiling apparatus, with which we made daily and simultaneous observations, unanimously declared that our canoes were gliding upstream, though we were descending at the rate of 5 miles an hour. The temperature is decidedly lower, and the winds are stronger as we near the Amazon. December 10th, our last day on the Napo. In celebration of the event, we killed a fine young doe as it was crossing the river. It closely resembled the Virginia deer. At 9 a.m., the Indians shouted in their quiet way, Marañón. It was as thrilling as Thalata to Xenophon's soldiers. We were not expecting to reach it till night, being deceived by Villavicencio's map, which, in common with all others, locates the Curaray and Mazan too far to the north. We halted for an hour at Camindo, a little fishing hamlet claimed by Peru, and then hastened to get our first sight of the Amazon. With emotions we cannot express, we gazed upon this ocean stream. The march of the great river in its silent grandeur is sublime. In its untamed might, it rolls through the wilderness with a stately, solemn air, showing its awful power in cutting away the banks, tearing down trees, and building up islands in a day. Down the river we can look till the sky and water meet as on the sea, while the forest on either hand dwindles in the perspective to a long black line. Between these even walls of ever-living green, the resistless current hurries out of Peru, sweeps past the imperial guns of Tabatinga into Brazil, and plows its way visibly 200 miles into the Atlantic. At a small island standing where the Napo pays tribute to the monarch of rivers, mingling its water with the Huallaga and Ucayali, which have already come down from the Peruvian Andes, we bade adieu to our captain and cook, who, in the little canoe, paddled his way westward to seek his fortune in Iquitos. At this point, the Marañón, for so the natives call the upper Amazon, does not appear very much broader than the Napo, but its depth is far greater, and there are few sandbars. The water is always of a turbid yellow, while the Napo, though muddy during our voyage, is usually clear. The forest, moreover, on the banks of the Marañón, is not so striking as on the tributary. The palms are not so numerous, and the uniform height of the trees gives a monotonous, sea-like horizon. We arrived at Pebas December 12th, 10 hours after leaving the mouth of the Napo, and a month and a half from Quito. The first individual we met addressed us in good English, and proved to be Mr. Hawkswell of Birds and Insects, who has resided 30 years on the Amazon. His house, the largest and best in town, though but a roofed stockade, was generously placed at our disposal, and the fatted calf, an immense turtle, was immediately killed. To us, after the transit of the Andes and the dangers and hardships of the wilderness and the river, it seemed as if we had reached the end of our journey, though we were over 2,000 miles from the Atlantic. Pebas is situated on a high clay bluff beside the Ambiacu, a mile above its entrance into the Marañón. Excepting Mr. Hawkswell, the Peruvian governor, and 2 or 3 other whites, the inhabitants are Indians of the Orejones and Yagua tribes. The exportations are hammocks, sarsaparilla, palo de cruz, and urari. Palo de cruz is the very hard, dark-colored wood of a small leguminous tree, bearing large pink flowers. Urari is the poison used by all the Amazonian Indians. It is made by the ticunas on the Putumayo, by boiling to a jelly the juices of certain roots and herbs, chiefly of the Strychnos toxifera, though it does not contain any trace of strychnine. Tipped with urari, the needle-like arrow used in blowguns will kill an ox in 20 minutes, and a monkey in 10. We have reason to congratulate ourselves, wrote the facetious Sidney Smith, that our method of terminating disputes is by sword and pistol, and not by these medicated pins. But the poison appears to be harmless to men and other salt-eating animals, salt being an antidote. We were not troubled with sandflies after leaving the playas of the Napo, but the mosquitoes at Pebas were supernumerary. Perhaps, however, it was a special gathering on our account, for the natives have a notion that just before the arrival of a foreigner the mosquitoes come in great numbers. Many of the Indians are disfigured by dark blotches on the skin, the effects of a cutaneous disease very prevalent in central Amazonia. Here we first noticed the singular habit among the children of eating clay. This habit is not confined to the Otomacs on the Orinoco, nor to Indians altogether, for Negroes and whites have the same propensity. Mr. Hawkswell found it impossible to restrain his own children. Bates ascribes the morbid craving to the meagre diet. This may be true to some extent, but it is certainly strange that the extraordinary desire to swallow earth chiefly unctuous clays, is found only in the tropics, where vegetation is so rank and fruit so abundant. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 16. We left Pebas for Tabatinga in the Peruvian steamer Morona, Captain Raigado. Going up to Jerusalem by railroad, or ascending the Nile by a screw whisking the sacred waters, is not so startling as the sight of a steamer in the heart of South America. There is such a contrast between the primeval wildness of the country and the people, and this triumph of civilized life, and one looks forward to the dazzling future of this great valley, when the ships of all nations will crowd the network of rivers for the gold and perfumes, the gems and woods of this western Ophir. The natives call the steamer the Devil's Boat, or Big Canoe, but they manifest little curiosity. Our Napo Indians were evidently afraid of it, and stood afar off. The first steamers that broke the deep solitude of the Marañón were the Hualaga and Tirado, brought out in 1853 by Dr. Whitemore for Peru. They were built in New York, of Georgia pine, costing Peru $75,000, and reflected no credit on the United States. They lie rotting near Nauta. Peru has now 2 iron steamers of London make, the Morona and Pastaza, besides 2 smaller craft for exploring the tributaries. These steamers are for government service, but 3 more are building in England with passenger accommodations. The Morona has a tonnage of 500 and an engine of 150 horsepower. The engineers are English, and the cook is a Chinaman. She makes monthly trips between Yurimaguas on the Huallaga River and Tabatinga on the Brazilian frontier. Her rate downstream is 18 miles an hour, and from 11 to 12 against the current. These steamers do not pay expenses at present, but they preserve the authority of Peru on the Marañón, and supply with material the government works at Iquitos. They also do a little commerce, taking down sarsaparilla and moyabamba hats, and bringing up English dry goods. There were not half a dozen passengers on board. The only towns of any consequence west of Pebas are Iquitos, Nauta, and Yurimaguas. Peru claims them, in fact, all the villages on the Marañón. Iquitos is the most thriving town on the upper Amazon. It is situated on an elevated plain on the left bank of the river, 60 miles above the mouth of the Napo. In Herndon's time it was a fishing village of 227 inhabitants. It now contains 2,000. Here are the government ironworks, carried on by English mechanics. In 1867 there were 6 engineers, 2 iron molders, 2 brass molders, 2 coppersmiths, 3 blacksmiths, 3 pattern makers, 2 boiler makers, 5 shipwrights, 3 sawyers, besides bricklayers, brickmakers, carpenters, coopers, etc., in all 42. All the coal for the furnaces is brought from England. The lignite on the banks of the Marañón is unfit for the purpose. A floating dock for vessels of 1,000 tons has just been built. Nauta lies on the north bank of the Marañón, opposite the entrance of the Ucayali. Its inhabitants, about 1,000, trade in fish, sarsaparilla, and wax from Ucayali. Yurimaguas is the port of Moyabamba, a city of 10,000 souls, 6 days' travel southwest. This vast eastern slope, lying on the branches of the Marañón, is called the Montaña of Peru. It is a region of inexhaustible fertility, and would yield ample returns to energy and capital. The villages are open to foreign commerce, free of duty, but at present the voice of civilized men is seldom heard, save on the main fluvial highway between Moyabamba and the Brazilian frontier. The Portuguese are the most adventurous traders. The value of imports to Peru by the Amazonian steamers during 1867 was $324,533, of exports $267,748. In 2 hours and a half we arrived at Malcayacta, or Old Town, an Indian village on the right bank of the river. Here our passports were vised by the Peruvian governor, and the steamer wooded up. One of the hands of the Morona was Manuel Medina, a Mameluco, who was employed by Bates and Agassiz in their explorations. We left at noon of the following day, and anchored for the night off Caballococha, for the Peruvian steamers run only in the daytime. Caballococha, or Horse Lake, is a Ticuna town, situated on a level tract of light loam, closely surrounded by the dense forest, and beside a caño of clear water leading to a pretty lake. Ecuador claims this town, and likewise all the settlements on the Marañón, but her learned geographer, Villavicencio, with characteristic ignorance of the country, has located it on the north bank of the river. We passed in the afternoon the little tug Napo, having on board Admiral Tucker, the rebel, who, with some associates, is exploring the tributaries of the upper Amazon for the Peruvian government. They had just returned from a voyage of 250 miles up the Javari. One of the party had a tame tiger cat in his arms. We arrived at Loreto early the next morning. This village of 20 houses and a church is prettily situated on the left bank, with a green slope in front. It is the most easterly town of Peru on the Amazon. Here resides Mr. Wilkins, the Brazilian consul, of German birth but North American education. The inhabitants are Peruvians, Portuguese, Negroes, and Ticuna Indians. The mosquitoes hold high carnival at this place. In 2 hours we were at San Antonio, a military post on the Peruvian frontier, commanded by a French engineer, Manuel Charon, who also studied in the United States. One large building and a flagstaff on a high bluff of red clay were all that was visible of San Antonio, but the Morona brought down a gang of Indians, impressed, no doubt, to build a fort for 20 guns. The site is in dispute, a Brazilian claiming it as private property. The white barracks of Tabatinga, the first fortress in Brazil, are in plain sight, the voyage consuming but 20 minutes. Between San Antonio and Tabatinga is a ravine, on either side of which is a white pole marking the limits of the Republic and the Empire. Tabatinga has long been a military post, but excepting the government buildings, there are not a dozen houses. Numerous Indians, however, of the Ticuna tribe, dwell in the neighboring forest. The commandante was Ilustríssimo Senhor Tenente Aristides Juste Mavigné, a tall, thin, stooping officer, dressed in brown linen. He received us with great civility, and tendered a house and servant during our stay in port. We preferred, however, to accept the hospitalities of the Morona till the arrival of the Brazilian steamer. Senhor Mavigné was commandante of Manaus when visited by Agassiz, and presented the professor with 100 varieties of wood. With the like courtesy, he gave us a collection of reptiles, all of them rare, and many of them new species. He showed us also a live raposa, or wild dog, peculiar to the Amazon, but seldom seen. Tabatinga stands on an eminence of yellow clay, and is defended by 12 guns. The river in front is quite narrow, only about half a mile wide. Here our passports, which had been signed at Malcayacta and Loreto, were endorsed by the commandante. They were afterward examined at Ega, Manaus, and Pará. The mean temperature of Tabatinga we found to be 82 degrees. Some rubber and salt fish are exported, but nothing of consequence is cultivated. Grapes, the people say, grow well, but are destroyed by the ants. The only fruit trees we noticed were the mamão, in Spanish papaya, aracá, and abil. The papao tree bears male and female flowers on different trees, and hence receives the name of papaya or mamão, according to one's view of the preeminence of the sex. The juice of this tree is used by the ladies of the West Indies as a cosmetic, and by the butchers to render the toughest meat tender. The fruit is melon-shaped and of an orange-yellow color. Vauquelin discovered in it fibrine, till lately supposed to be confined to the animal kingdom. The Peruvian steamers connect at Tabatinga with the Brazilian line. There are 8 imperial steamers on the Amazon, the Icamiaba, running between Tabatinga and Manaus, the Tapajós and Belém, plying between Manaus and Pará, the Inca and Manaus, between Óbidos and Pará, besides 2 steamers on the Tocantins, one between Pará and Chaves, and projected lines for the Negro, Tapajós, and Madeira. The captains get a small salary, but the perquisites are large, as they have a percentage on the freight. One captain pocketed in 1 year $9,000. We embarked on December 12th on the Icamiaba, which promptly arrived at Tabatinga. The commander, formerly a lieutenant in the Imperial Navy, and for 12 years a popular officer in the upper Amazon, was a polished gentleman, but rigid disciplinarian. As an example of Brazilian etiquette, we give his full address from one of our letters of introduction. Ilustríssimo Senhor Capitão de Fragata Nuno Alves Pereira de Melo Cardoso, digno comandante de vapor Icamiaba. The Icamiaba was an iron boat of 450 tons, with 2 engines of 50 horsepower each. The engineer was an Austrian, yet the captain gave his orders in English, though neither could speak the language. The saloon, with berths for 25 passengers, was above deck, and open at both ends for ventilation. The passengers, however, usually swung their hammocks on the upper deck, which was covered by an awning. This was a delightfully breezy and commanding position, and though every part of the steamer was in perfect order, this was scrupulously neat. Here the table was spread with every tropical luxury, and attentively served by young men in spotless attire. Happy the traveller who sits at the table of Comandante Cardoso. The refreshment hours were coffee as soon as the passengers turned out of their hammocks, and sometimes before, breakfast at 10, dinner at 5, and tea at 8. Live bullocks, fowls, and turtles were kept on board, so that of fresh meat, particularly beef, the first we had tasted since leaving Quito, there was no lack. At breakfast we counted 9 different courses of meat. The Peruvian steamers are limited to turtle and saltfish. Rice and farinha are extensively used in Brazil, but we saw very little tapioca. Farinha is the flour of the country, and is eaten in hard, dry grains. It will not keep in any other form. It cannot be very nutritious, as it contains little gluten. All bread and butter are imported from the United States and England. The captains of Brazilian steamers are their own stewards, and in the midst of other business in port, they stop to negotiate for a chicken or a dozen eggs with an Indian or Negro. The Icamiaba left Tabatinga with only 3 first-class passengers, besides our own party. On no Amazon steamer did we meet with a lady passenger. Madame Godin, who came down the river from the Andes, and Mrs. Agassiz, who ascended to Tabatinga, were among the few ladies who have seen these upper waters. But how differently they travelled, one on a raft, the other on the beautiful Icamiaba. Between Tabatinga and Tefé, a distance of 500 miles, is perhaps the most uncivilized part of the main river. Ascending, we find improvements multiply as we near the mountains of Peru. Descending, we see the march of civilization in the budding cities and expanding commerce, culminating at Grã-Pará. The scenery from the deck of an Amazonian steamer, if described, appears monotonous. A vast volume of smooth, yellow water, floating trees and beds of aquatic grass, low, linear-shaped, wooded islets, a dark, even forest, the shores of a boundless sea of verdure, and a cloudless sky, occasionally obscured by flocks of parrots. These are the general features. No busy towns are seen along the banks of the middle Amazon, only here and there a palm hut or semi-Indian village half buried in the wilderness. We agree with Darwin, speaking of the Plata, that a wide expanse of muddy water has neither grandeur nor beauty. The real grandeur, however, of a great river like this is derived from reflecting upon its prospective commercial importance and its immense drainage. A lover of nature, moreover, can never tire of gazing at the picturesque grouping and variety of trees with their mantles of creeping plants, while a little imagination can see in the alligators, ganoid fishes, sea cows, and tall gray herons, the ichthyosaurus, holoptychius, Dinotherium, and Brontozoon of ancient days. Here and there the river is bordered with low alluvial deposits, covered with feathery-topped arrowgrass and amphibious vegetation. But generally the banks are about 10 feet high and magnificently wooded. They are abrupt, and landslides are frequent. A few minutes after leaving Tabatinga, we passed the mouth of the Javari, which forms the natural boundary between Peru and Brazil. Henceforth the river loses the name of Marañón and is called Solimões, or more commonly simply Amazon. We were 10 hours in reaching São Paulo, a wretched Ticuna village of 500 souls, built on a grassy tableland nearly 100 feet high. Steps have been cut in the slippery clay bluff to facilitate the ascent. Swamps lie back of the town, rendering it unhealthy. On damp nights, says the naturalist on the Amazon, the chorus of frogs and toads which swarm in weedy backyards creates such a bewildering uproar that it is impossible to carry on a conversation indoors except by shouting. In 10 hours more we had passed the Putumayo and entered the Tunantins, a sluggish, dark-colored tributary emptying into the Amazon about 200 miles below the Javari. On the bank of white earth, which strongly contrasts with the tinted stream, is a dilapidated hamlet of 25 hovels, built of bamboo plastered with mud and whitewashed. We saw but one 2-storied house, and all have ground floors and double-thatched roofs. The inhabitants are semi-civilized Shumana and Passe Indians and half-breeds. But in the gloomy forest which hugs the town live the wild Caixanas. The atmosphere is close and steaming, but not hot, the mercury at noon standing at 83 degrees. The place is alive with insects and birds. The nights on the Amazon were invariably cool, on the lower Amazon cold, so that we required a heavy blanket. Taking on board wood, beeves, turtles, saltfish, and watermelons, we left at 2:30 p.m. The Brazilian steamers run all night, and with no slackening of speed. At 1 o'clock we were awakened by a cry from the watch, "Stop her!" and immediately after there was a crash. But it was only the breaking of crockery caused by the sudden stoppage. The night was fearfully dark, and for aught we knew the steamer was running headlong into the forest. Fortunately there was no collision, and in a few minutes we were again on our way, arriving at Fonte Boa at 4 a.m. This little village stands in a palm grove, on a high bank of ochre-colored sandy clay, beside a slough of sluggish black water, 8 miles from the Amazon. The inhabitants, about 300, are ignorant, lazy mamelucos. They dress like the majority of the semi-civilized people on the Amazon, the men content with shirt and pantaloons, the women wearing cotton or gauze chemises and calico petticoats. Fonte Boa is a museum for the naturalist, but the headquarters of mosquitoes, small but persistent. Taking in a large quantity of turtle oil, the Icamiaba turned down the Caño, but almost immediately ran aground, and we were 2 hours getting off. These yearly shifting shoals in the Amazon cannot be laid down in charts, and the most experienced pilots often run foul of them. In 12 hours we entered the Tefé, a tributary from the Bolivian mountains. Just before reaching the great river, it expands into a beautiful lake with a wide sandy beach. On a grassy slope, stretching out into the lake with a harbor on each side of it, lies the city of Ega. 100 palm-thatched cottages of mud and tiled frame houses, each with an enclosed orchard of orange, lemon, banana, and guava trees, surround a rude church marked by a huge wooden crucifix on the green before it instead of a steeple. Cacao, açaí, and pupunha palms rise above the town, adding greatly to its beauty, while back of all, on the summit of the green slope, begins the picturesque forest, pathless, save here and there a faint hunter's track leading to the untrodden interior. The sheep and cattle grazing on the lawn, a rare sight in Alto Amazonas, gives a peaceful and inviting aspect to the scene. The inhabitants, numbering about 1,200, are made up of pure Indians, half-castes, Negroes, mulattoes, and whites. Ega, also called Tefé, is the largest and most thriving town between Manaus and Iquitos, a distance of 1,200 miles. It is also one of the oldest settlements on the river, having been founded during the English Revolution, or nearly 2 centuries ago. Tupi is the common idiom. The productions of the country are cacao, sarsaparilla, Brazil nuts, bass for caulking vessels, copaíba balsam, India rubber, saltfish, turtle oil, manatee, grass hammocks, and tiles. Bates calculates the value of the annual exports at nearly $40,000. The Icamiaba calls here twice a month, besides which there are small schooners which occupy about 5 months in the round trip between Ega and Pará. The place is healthy, writes the charming naturalist on the Amazon, and almost free from insect pests. Perpetual verdure surrounds it. The soil is of marvelous fertility, even for Brazil. The endless rivers and labyrinths of channels teem with fish and turtle. A fleet of steamers might anchor at any season of the year in the lake, which has uninterrupted water communication straight to the Atlantic. What a future is in store for the sleepy little tropical village. Here Bates pursued butterflies for 4 years and a half, and Agassiz fished for 6 months. Ega is the halfway point across the continent, but its exact altitude above the sea is unknown. Herndon's boiling apparatus gave 2,000 feet, and what is worse, the lieutenant believed it. Our barometer made it 100 feet, but as our instrument, though perfect in itself, behaved very strangely on the middle Amazon, we do not rely on the calculation. The true height is not far from 125 feet, or 1/5 the elevation of the middle point in the North American continent. Taking on board saltfish, turtle oil, and tiles, we left Ega 2 hours after midnight, reaching Quari at noon. The Amazon began to look more like a lake than a river, having a width of 4 or 5 miles. Floating gulls and rolling porpoises remind one of the sea. Quari is a huddle of 15 houses, 6 of them plastered without, whitewashed and tiled. It is situated on a lake of the same name, the expanded outlet of a small river whose waters are dark brown, and whose banks are low and covered with bushes. Here we took in turtles and turtle oil, Brazil nuts and cocoa nuts, rubber, saltfish, and wood, and 6 hours after leaving, more fish and rubber were received at Cudajá. Cudajá is a lonely spot on the edge of an extensive system of backwaters and lakes, running through a dense, unexplored forest inhabited by Mura savages. At 3 in the afternoon of Christmas, 74 hours running time from Tabatinga, we entered the Rio Negro. Strong is the contrast between its black-dyed waters and the yellow Amazon. The line separating the two rivers is sharply drawn, the waters meeting, not mingling. Circular patches of the dark waters of the Negro are seen floating like oil amid the turbid waters of the Amazon. The sluggish tributary seems to be dammed up by the impetuous monarch. The banks of the latter are low, ragged, perpendicular beds of clay, covered with a bright green foliage. The Negro is fringed with sandy beaches, with hills in the background clothed with a sombre, monotonous forest containing few palms or leguminous trees. Mosquitoes, piuns, and montucas never trouble the traveller on the inky stream. When seen in a tumbler, the water of the Negro is clear, but of a light red color, due undoubtedly to vegetable matter. The visible mouth of the river at this season of the year, December, is 3 miles wide, but from mainland to mainland it cannot be less than 20. In 40 minutes after leaving the Amazon, we arrived at Manaus. This important city lies on the left bank of the Negro, 10 miles from its mouth and 20 feet above high water level. The site is very uneven and consists of ferruginous sandstone. There was originally a fort here, erected by the Portuguese to protect their slave-hunting expeditions among the Indians on the river, hence the ancient name of Barra. On the old map of Father Fritz, 1707, the spot is named Taromas. Since 1852 it has been called Manaus, after the most warlike tribe. Some of the houses are two-storied, but the majority are low adobe structures, white and yellow washed, floored and roofed with tiles, and having green doors and shutters. Every room is furnished with hooks for hanging hammocks. We did not see a bed between Quito and New York, except on the steamers. The population, numbering 2,000, is a mongrel set, Brazilians, Portuguese, Italians, Jews, Negroes, and Indians, with diverse crosses between them. Laziness is the prominent characteristic. A gentleman offered an Indian passing his door 25 cents if he would bring him a pitcher of water from the river, only a few rods distant. He declined. "But I will give you 50 cents, whereupon the half-clothed, penniless aboriginal replied, "I will give you $1 to bring me some." While every inch of the soil is of exuberant fertility, there is always a scarcity of food. It is the dearest spot on the Amazon. Most of the essentials and all of the luxuries come from Liverpool, Lisbon, and New York. Agriculture is at a discount on the Amazon. Brazilians will not work. European immigrants are traders. Nothing can be done with Indians, and Negroes are few in number, the slave trade being abolished, emancipation begun, and the Paraguayan War not ended. A laboring class will ever be a desideratum in this tropical country. With a healthy climate and a situation at the juncture of two great navigable rivers, Manaus is destined to become the St. Louis of South America. In commercial advantages it is hardly to be surpassed by any other city in the world, having water communication with 2/3 of the continent, and also with the Atlantic. It is now the principal station for the Brazilian line of steamers. Here all goods for a higher or lower point are reshipped. The chief articles of export are coffee of superior quality, sarsaparilla, Brazil nuts, piaçaba, and fish. The Negro at this point is really 5 or 6 miles wide, but the opposite shore is masked by low islands, so that it appears to be but 1.5 miles. The country around Manaus is quite romantic for the Amazonian valley. The land is undulating and furrowed by ravines, and the vegetation covering it is marvelously rich and diversified. In the forest, 2 miles from the city, there is a natural curiosity celebrated by all travelers from Spix and Marshes down. A rivulet coming out of the wilderness falls over a ledge of red sandstone 10 feet high and 50 feet broad, forming a beautiful cascade. The water is cool and of a deep orange color. The foundation of a fine stone cathedral was laid in Manaus 14 years ago, but this generation is not likely to witness the dedication. Life in this Amazonian city is dull enough. Commerce is not brisk, and society is stiff. Balls are about the only amusements. On Sunday, the holiday, everybody who can afford it comes out in Paris fashions. There are carts, but no coaches. We called upon the president at his palace, an odd term for a two-storied, whitewashed edifice. His Excellency received us with less formality and more cordiality than we expected to find in the solemn officials of the empire. The first glance at the reception-room, with the 4 chairs for visitors set in 2 lines at right angles to the chair of state, promised cold etiquette, but he addressed us with considerable familiarity and evident good-will. We found, however, that his authority was quite limited, for a written order which he gave us for a subordinate did not receive the slightest consideration. At the house of a Jew named Levy we met a party of Southerners, Captains Mallory, Jones, Sandedge, and Wynne, commanded by Dr. Dowsing, who, since the late unpleasantness, as Nasby calls it, have determined to settle in this country. The government grants them 20 square leagues of land on any tributary, on condition that they will colonize it. They were about to start for the Rio Branco on an exploring tour. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 17. At 10 p.m. we left Manaus in the Tapajós, an iron steamer of 700 tons. We missed the snow-white cleanliness and rigid regularity of the Icamiaba, and Captain José Antunes Rodrigues de Oliveira Catrambi was quite a contrast to Lieutenant Nuno. There were only 5 first-class passengers besides ourselves, and 4 of these were deadheads, though there were accommodations for 64. Between Manaus and Pará, a distance of 1,000 miles, there were 14 additions. Passing the mouth of the Madeira, the largest tributary to the Amazon, we anchored 30 miles below, at Serpa, after 9 hours' sailing. Serpa is a village of 90 houses, built on a high bank of variegated clay, whence its Indian name, Itacoatiara, or Painted Rock. It was the most animated place we had seen on the river. The town is irregularly laid out and overrun with weeds, but there is a busy tile factory, and the port was full of canoes, montarias, and cobertas. The African element in the population began to show itself prominently here, and increased in importance as we neared Pará. The negroes are very ebony, and are employed as stevedores. The Indians are well featured, and wear a long gown of bark cloth reaching to the knees. Taking on board rubber and salt fish, the Tapajós steamed downstream, passing the perpendicular pink clay cliffs of Cararaucu, arriving in 10 hours at Vila Nova, 150 miles below Serpa. Vila Nova is a straggling village of mud huts standing on a conglomerate bank. The trade is chiefly in rubber, copaíba, and fish. The location is healthy, and in many respects is one of the most desirable places on the river. Here the Amazon begins to narrow, being scarcely 3 miles wide, but the channel, which has a rocky bed, is very deep. 100 miles from Vila Nova is Óbidos, airily situated on a bluff of pink and yellow clay, 100 feet above the river. The clay rests on a wide calcareous earth, and this on red sandstone. It is a picturesque, substantially built town, with a population, mostly white, engaged in raising cacao and cattle. Cacao is the most valuable project on the Amazon below Vila Nova. The soil is fertile, and the surrounding forest is alive with monkeys, birds, and insects, and abounds with precious woods and fruits. Óbidos is blessed with a church, a school, and a weekly newspaper, and is defended by 32 guns. This is the Thermopylae of the Amazon, the great river contracting to a strait not a mile in width, through which it rushes with tremendous velocity. The depth is 40 fathoms, and the current 2.4 feet per second. As Bates remarks, however, the river valley is not contracted to this breadth, the southern shore not being continental land, but a low alluvial tract subject to inundation. Back of Óbidos is an eminence, which has been named Mount Agassiz in honor of the naturalist. There is no mountain between it and Cotopaxi, save the spurs from the eastern Cordillera. 5 miles above the town is the mouth of the Trombetas, where Orellana had his celebrated fight with the fabulous Amazons. Adding to her cargo wood, hides, horses, and Paraguayan prisoners, short, athletic men, the Tapajós sailed for Santarém. The river scenery below Óbidos loses its wild and solitary character, and is relieved with scattered habitations, factories, and cacao plantations. We arrived at Santarém in 7 hours from Óbidos, a distance of 50 miles. This city, the largest on the Amazon save Pará, stands on a pretty slope at the mouth of the Rio Tapajós, and 500 miles from the sea. It mainly consists of 3 long rows of whitewashed, tiled houses, girt with green gardens. The citizens, made up of Brazilians, Portuguese, mulattoes, and blacks, number about 2,500. The surrounding country, which is an undulating campo with patches of wood, is sparsely inhabited by Tapajocos. Cattle estates and cacao plantations are the great investments, but the soil is poor. Considerable sarsaparilla of superior quality, rubber, copaíba, Brazil nuts, and farina come down the Tapajós. The climate is delightful, the trade winds tempering the heat and driving away all insect pests. Leprosy is somewhat common among the poorer class. At Santarém is one of the largest colonies which migrated from the disaffected Gulf states for Brazil. 160 southerners pitched their tents here. Many of them, however, were soon disgusted with the country, and, if we are to believe reports, the country was disgusted with them. On the 1st of January, 1868, only 75 remained. The colony does not fairly represent the United States, being made up in great part of the roughs of Mobile. A few are contented and are doing well. Amazonia will be indebted to them for some valuable ideas. Bates says, butter making is unknown in this country. The milk, I was told, was too poor. But these Anglo-Saxon immigrants have no difficulty in making butter. Santarém sends to Pará for sugar, but the Cavaliers of Alabama are proving that the sugar cane grows better than in Louisiana, attaining the height of 20 feet, and that it will yield for 10 or 12 years without transplanting or cultivation. It is not, however, so sweet or juicy as the southern cane. Some of the colonists are making tapioca and cachaça, or Brazilian rum. Others have gone into the pork business, while one, Dr. Jones, expects to realize a fortune burning lime. Here we met the rebel ex-general Dobbins, who had been prospecting on the Tapajós River, but had not yet located himself. Below Santarém, the Amazon vastly increases in width. At one point, the southern shore was invisible from the steamer. The waves often run very high. At 10 a.m., 8 hours from Santarém, we enter the romantic port of Monte Alegre. The road from the river to the village, just visible inland, runs through a pretty dell. Back of the village, beyond a low, swampy flat, rise the table-topped blue hills of Almeirim. It was an exhilarating sight, and a great relief, to gaze upon a mountain range from 300 to 1,000 feet high, the greatest elevations along the Amazon east of the Andes. Agassiz considers these singular mountains the remnants of a plain which once filled the whole valley of the Amazon, but Bates believes them to be the southern terminus of the highland of Guiana. Their geological constitution, a pebbly sandstone, favors the professor's theory. The range extends 90 miles along the north bank of the river, the western limit at Monte Alegre bearing the local name of Serra Hererê. Mount Agassiz at Óbidos is a spur of the same tableland. The Amazon is here about 5 miles wide, the southern shore being low, uninhabited, and covered with coarse grass. 5 schooners were anchored in the harbor of Monte Alegre, a sign of considerable trade for the Amazon. The place exports cattle, cacao, rubber, and fish. In 4 hours we reached Prainha, a dilapidated village of 40 houses situated on a low, sandy beach. The chief occupation is the manufacture of turtle oil. In 10 hours more we were taking in wood at Porto do Mois, situated just within the mouth of the Xingu, the last great tributary to the Amazon. Dismal was our farewell sail on the great river. With the highlands came foul weather. We were treated to frequent and furious showers, accompanied by a violent wind, and the atmosphere was filled with smoke caused by numerous fires in the forest. Where the Xingu comes in, the Amazon is 10 miles wide, but it is soon divided by a series of islands, the first of which is Grand Island. 20 miles below Porto do Mois is Gurupá, where we took in rubber. The village, nearly as inanimate as Pompeii, consists of one street, half deserted, built on an isolated site. 40 miles below Gurupá we left the Amazon proper, turning to the right down a narrow channel leading into the river Pará. The forest became more luxuriant, the palms especially increasing in number and beauty. At one place there was a forest of palms, a singularity, for trees of the same order are seldom associated. The forest, densely packed and gloomy, stands on very low, flat banks of hard river mud. Scarcely a sign of animal life was visible, but, as we progressed, dusky faces peered out of the woods, little shanties belonging to the seringueiros, or rubber-makers, here and there broke the solitude, and occasionally a large group of half-clad natives greeted us from the shore. A labyrinth of channels connects the Amazon with the Pará. The steamers usually take the Tajapuru. This natural canal is of great depth and from 50 to 100 yards in width, so that, hemmed in by 2 green walls 80 feet high, we seemed to be sailing through a deep gorge. In some places it was so narrow it was nearly over-arched by the foliage. 125 miles from Gurupá is Breves, a busy little town on the southwest corner of the great island of Marajó. The inhabitants, mostly Portuguese, are engaged in the rubber trade. The Indians in the vicinity manufacture fancy earthenware and painted cuias or calabashes. Soon after leaving Breves, we enter the Pará River, which suddenly begins with the enormous width of 8 miles. It is, however, shallow, and contains numerous shoals and islands. It is properly an estuary, immense volumes of fresh water flowing into it from the south. The tides are felt through its entire length of 160 miles, but the water is only slightly brackish. It has a dingy orange-brown color. A narrow blue line on our left, miles away, was all that was visible, at times, of the island of Marajó, and as we passed the broad mouth of the Tocantins, we were struck with the magnificent sea-like expanse, for there was scarcely a point of mainland to be seen. At 4 p.m., 18 hours from Breves, we entered the peaceful bay of Guajara, and anchored in front of the city of Pará. Beautiful was the view of the city from the harbor in the rays of the declining sun. The towering spires and cupolas, the palatial government buildings, the long row of tall warehouses facing a fleet of schooners, ships, and steamers, and pretty white villas in the suburbs, nestling in luxuriant gardens, were to us, who had just come down the Andes from medieval Quito, the Ultima Thule of civilization. We seemed to have stepped at once from the Amazon to New York or London. We might, indeed, say ne plus ultra in one respect. We had crossed the continent, and Pará was the terminus of our wanderings, the end of romantic adventures, of privations and perils. We were kindly met on the pier by Mr. James Henderson, an elderly Scotchman, whom a long residence in Pará, a bottomless fund of information, and a readiness to serve an Anglo-Saxon, have made an invaluable cicerone. We shot through the devious, narrow streets to the Hotel Diana, where we made our toilet, for our habiliments, too, had reached their Ultima Thule. As La Condamine said on his arrival at Quito, je me trouvais hors d'état de paraître en public avec décence. The same year which saw Shakespeare carried to his grave beside the Avon witnessed the founding of Pará, or, speaking more respectfully, of Santa Maria de Belém do Grã-Pará. The city stands on a low elbow of land formed by the junction of the rivers Guamá and Pará, 75 miles from the ocean. The great forest comes close up to the suburbs, and, in fact, vegetation is so rapid the city fathers have a hard struggle to keep the jungle out of the streets. The river in front is 20 miles wide, but the vast expanse is broken by numerous islets. Ships of any size will float within 150 yards of the shore. All passengers and goods are landed by boats at the custom-house wharf. The city is regularly laid out. There are several public squares, and many of the streets, especially in the commercial part, are well paved. Magnificent avenues, lined with silk cotton trees, cocoa palms, and almonds, lead out to beautiful hacinas, or country residences, of one story, but having spacious verandas. The President's house, built in the Italian style, whose marble staircase is a wonder to Brazil. The 6 large churches, including the cathedral, after patterns from Lisbon, the post office, custom house, and convent-looking warehouses on the mole. These are the most prominent buildings. The architecture is superior to that of Quito. The houses, generally 2-storied, are tiled, plastered, and whitewashed or painted. The popular colors are red, yellow, and blue. A few have porcelain facing. The majority have elegant balconies and glass windows, but not all the old projecting lattice casements have disappeared. Some of the buildings bear the marks of the cannonading in the Revolution of 1835. Instead of bedrooms and beds, the largest apartments and verandas have hooks in the wall for hammocks. A carpeted, cushioned room is seldom seen, and is out of place in the tropics. Coaches and gas are supplanting ox carts and candles. There are 2 hotels, but scant accommodations for travelers. Beef is almost the only meat used. The fish are poor and dear. The oysters are horrible. Bananas, oranges, and coffee are the best native productions on the table. The population of Pará is 35,000, or double what it was when Wallace and Bates entered it 20 years ago. It is the largest city on the largest river in the world, and the capital of a province 10 times the size of New York State. The enterprising, wealthy class consists of Portuguese and pure Brazilians, with a few English, Germans, French, and North Americans. The multitude is an amalgamation of Portuguese, Indian, and Negro. The diversity of races and the mingled dialects of the Amazon and Arab make an attractive street scene. Side by side we see the corpulent Brazilian planter, the swarthy Portuguese trader, the merry Negro porter, and the apathetic Indian boatman. Some of the more recent offspring are dressed à la dame before the fall. Numbers wear only a shirt or skirt. The Negro girls who go about the streets with trays of sweetmeats on their heads are loosely yet prettily dressed in pure white, with massive gilded chains and earrings. But the middle and upper classes generally follow Paris fashions. The mechanic arts are in the hands of free Negroes and Indians, mulattoes and mamelucos. Commerce is carried on almost exclusively by Portuguese and other foreigners. Dry goods come chiefly from England and France, groceries from Portugal, flour and hardware from the United States. The principal exports are rubber, cacao, coffee, sugar, cotton, Brazil nuts, sarsaparilla, vanilla, farina, copaíba, tobacco, rum, hides, fish, parrots, and monkeys. Pará exceeds, in the number of its indigenous commodities, any other port in the world, but the trade at present is insignificant when we consider the vast extent and resources of the country. The city can never have a rival at the mouth of the Amazon, and is destined to become a great emporium. But Brazilian legislation stands in the way. Heavy import duties are charged, from 35 to 45%, and on the 1st of January 1868 it was ordered that 15% must be paid in English gold. The consequence has been that gold has risen from 28 to 30 above par, creating an additional tax. Exportation is equally discouraging. There is a duty of 9% to be paid at the custom house, and 7% more at the consulado. But this is not the sum total. Those who live outside of the province of Pará, say above Óbidos, must first pay an import of 13% to get their produce into Pará. For example, up the river, crude rubber can be bought for 25 cents a pound. The trader pays 25 cents in arroba, 32 pounds, for transportation to Pará from Santarém, exclusive of canoe hire and shipping. 13% duty in entering Pará, 10% to the commission merchant, and 16% more as export tax, making a total loss on labor of about 50%. Brazil abounds with the most valuable woods in the world, but is prevented from competing with other nations by this system of self-strangulation. In 1867, the import duty on timber was 12%. Though situated on the edge of a boundless forest, Pará consumes large quantities of North American pine. There is not a grist mill on the Amazon, and only 2 or 3 sawmills. A dozen boards of red cedar, a very common timber, costs 60 contos de réis per thousand, about $30 at Santarém. There is no duty on goods going to Peru. The current money, besides foreign gold, consists of copper coins and imperial treasury notes. The basis of calculation is the imaginary rei, equivalent to half a mill. The coins in use are the vintém, 20 réis, answering to our cent, the half vintém, and double vintém. The currency has so fluctuated in value that many of the pieces have been restamped. 50 vinténs make a 1000 réis, expressed thus: 1.000 réis. This is the smallest paper issue. Unfortunately, the notes may suddenly fall below par. As a great many counterfeits made in Portugal are in circulation, the government recalls the issue which has been counterfeited, notifying holders by the provincial papers that all such bills must be exchanged for a new issue within 6 months. Those not brought in at the end of that period lose 10% of their value, and 10% for each following month, until the value of the note is nil. The result has been that many persons trading up the river have lost heavily and now demand hard money. Change is very scarce in Pará. The province of Pará is governed by a president chosen at Rio, and every 4 years sends representatives to the imperial parliament. The Constitution of Brazil is very liberal. Every householder, without distinction of race or color, has a vote, and may work its way up to high position. There are 2 drawbacks: the want of intelligence and virtue in the people, and the immense staff of officials employed to administer the government. There are also many formalities which are not only useless but a hindrance to prosperity. Thus, the internal trade of a province carried on by Brazilian subjects is not exempt from the passport system. A foreigner finds as much trouble in getting his passport en règle in Pará as in Vienna. The religion of Pará is Romish, and not so tolerant as in Rio. We arrived during festa. When did a traveller enter a Portuguese town on any other than a feast day? That night was made hideous with rockets, firecrackers, cannon, and bells. Music, noise, and fireworks, says Wallace, are the 3 essentials to please a Brazilian populace. The most celebrated shrine in northern Brazil is Our Lady of Nazareth. The little chapel stands about a mile out of the city, and is now rebuilding for the 3rd time. The image is a doll about the size of a girl 10 years old, wearing a silver crown and a dress of blue silk, glittering with golden stars. Hosts of miracles are attributed to Our Lady, and we were shown votive offerings and models of legs, arms, heads, etc., etc., the grateful in memoriam of wonderful cures, besides a boat whose crew were saved by invoking the protection of Mary. The facilities for education are improving. There are several seminaries in Pará, of which the chief is the Liceu da Capital. Too many youths, however, as in Quito, are satisfied with a little rhetoric and law. The city supports 4 newspapers. Paraenses may well be proud of their delightful climate. Wallace says the thermometer ranges from 74 to 87 degrees. Our observation made the mean annual temperature 80.2 degrees. The mean daily temperature does not vary more than 2 or 3 degrees. The climate is more equable than that of any other observed part of the New World. The greatest heat is reached at 2 o'clock, but it is never so oppressive as in New York. The greater the heat, the stronger the sea breeze, and in 300 out of 365 days, the air is further cooled by an afternoon shower. The rainiest month is April, the driest October or November. Lying in the delta of a great river, in the middle of the tropics, and half surrounded by swamps, its salubrity is remarkable. We readily excuse the proverb, "Quem vai para Pará, para." He who goes to Pará stops there, and we might have made it good had we not been tempted by the magnificent steamer South America, which came up from Rio on the way to New York. On the moonlit night of the 7th of January, when the Ice King had thrown his white robes over the north, we turned our backs upon the glimmering lights of Pará, and noiselessly as a canoe glided down the great river. As the sun rose for the last time to us upon the land of perpetual verdure, our gallant ship was ploughing the mottled waters on the edge of the ocean, mingled yellow patches of the Amazon and dark streaks from the Pará floating on the Atlantic green. Far behind us we could see the breakers dashing against the Braganza banks. a moment after Cape Maguire dropped beneath the horizon, and with it South America vanished from our view. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 18. Tributaries and tints, volume and current, rise and fall, navigation, expeditions on the Great River. Near the silver mines of Cerro Pasco, in the little lake of Lauricocha, just below the limit of perpetual winter, rises the King of Waters. For the first 500 miles it flows northerly in a continuous series of cataracts and rapids through a deep valley between the parallel cordilleras of Peru. Upon reaching the frontier of Ecuador, it turns to the right and runs easterly 2,500 miles across the great equatorial plain of the continent. No other river flows in the same latitude and retains, therefore, the same climatic conditions for so great a distance. The breadth of the Amazon, also, is well proportioned to its extraordinary length. At Tabatinga, 2,000 miles above its mouth, it is 1.5 miles wide. At the entrance of the Madeira, it is 3 miles. Below Santarém, it is 10. And if the Pará be considered a part of the great river, it fronts the Atlantic 180 miles. Brazilians proudly call it the Mediterranean of the New World. Its vast expanse, presenting below Tefé magnificent reaches with blank horizons and forming a barrier between different species of animals, its system of back channels joining the tributaries and linking a series of lagoons too many ever to be named, its network of navigable waters stretching over 1/3 of the continent, its oceanic fauna, porpoises and manatees, gulls and frigate birds, remind the traveler of a great inland sea with endless ramifications rather than a river. The side channels through the forest, called by the Indians igarapés, or canoe paths, are one of the characteristic features of the Amazon. They often run to a great distance parallel to the great river and intersecting the tributaries, so that one can go from Santarém 1,000 miles up the Amazon without once entering it. These natural highways will be of immense advantage for intercommunication. But extraordinary as is this network of natural canals, the tributaries of the Amazon are still more wonderful. They are so numerous, they appear on the map like 1,000 ribbons streaming from a mainmast, and many of the obscure affluents, though large as the Hudson, are unknown to geography. From 3 degrees north to 20 degrees south, every river that flows down the eastern slope of the Andes is a contributor, as though all the rivers between Mexico and Mount Hooker united their waters in the Mississippi. While the great river of the northern continent drains an area of 1,200,000 square miles, the Amazon, not including the Tocantins, is spread over 1 million more, or over a surface equal to 2/3 of all Europe. Let us journey around the grand trunk and take a glimpse of the main branches. The first we meet in going up the left bank is the Rio Negro. It rises in the Sierra Tunuhi, an isolated mountain group in the Llanos of Colombia, and enters the Amazon at Manaus, 1,000 miles from the sea. The upper part, down to the parallel of 1 degree north, has a very rapid current. At San Gabriel are the first rapids in ascending. Between San Gabriel and Barcellos, the rate is not over 2 or 3 miles per hour. Between Barcellos and Manaus, it is a deep but sluggish river, and in the annual rise of the Amazon, its waters are stagnant for several hundred miles up, or actually flow back. Its extreme length is 1,200 miles, and its greatest breadth is at Barcellos, where it is 12 or 15 miles. Excepting this middle section, the usual breadth of the Negro below the equatorial line is about 1 mile. It is joined to the Orinoco by the navigable Caciquiari, a natural canal 3/4 of a mile wide, and a portage of only 2 hours divides the head of its tributary, the Branco, from the Essequibo of Guiana. The Negro yields to commerce coffee, cacao, farina, sarsaparilla, Brazil nuts, pitch, piaçaba, and valuable woods. The commerce of Brazil with Venezuela by the Rio Negro amounted in 1867 to $22,000, of which 9,000 was the value of imports. The principal villages above Manaus are São Miguel and Moroa, which contain about 50 dwellings each, Tireguim, Barcellos, Toma, São Carlos, Quana, San Gabriel, and Santa Isabel. The next great affluent is the Japurá. It rises in the mountains of New Granada, and flowing southeasterly 1,000 miles, enters the Amazon opposite Ega, 500 miles above Manaus. Its principal mouth is 300 feet wide, but it has a host of distributing channels, the extremes of which are 200 miles apart. Its current is only 3/4 of a mile an hour, and it has been ascended by canoes 500 miles. A natural canal, like the Caciquiari, is said to connect it with the Orinoco. The products of the Japurá are sarsaparilla, copaíba, rubber, cacao, farina, Brazil nuts, moirapiranga, a hard, fine-grained wood of a rich, cherry-red color, and carajuru, a brilliant scarlet dye. Parallel to the Japurá is the Putumayo, or Issa. Its source is the Lake of San Pablo, at the foot of the volcano of Pasto. Its mouth, as given by Herndon, is half a mile broad, and its current 2 3/4 miles an hour. Farther west are the Napo and Pastaça, starting from the volcanoes of Quito. The former is nearly 700 miles long, navigable 500. The latter is an unnavigable torrent. One of its branches, the Topo, is one continued rapid. Of those who have fallen into it, only one has come out alive. Another, the Patate, rises near Iliniza, runs through the plain to a little south of Cotopaxi, receives all streams flowing from the eastern side of the western Cordillera from Iliniza to Chimborazo, and unites near Tunguragua with the Chambo, which rises near Sangaí. Castelnau and Bates saw pumice floating on the Amazon. It was probably brought from Cotopaxi by the Pastaça. Crossing the Marañón and going eastward, we first pass the Hualaga, a rapid river of the size of the Cumberland, coming down the Peruvian Andes from an altitude of 8,600 feet, and entering the great river nearly opposite the Pastaça. Its mouth is a mile wide, and for 100 miles up, its average depth is 3 fathoms. In July, August, and September, the steamers are not able to ascend to Yurimaguas. Canoe navigation begins at Tingamaria, 300 miles from Lima. The fertile plain through which the river flows is attractive to an agriculturist. Cotton is gathered 6 months after sowing, and rice in 5 months. At Tarapoto, a large amount of cotton cloth is woven for export. The next great tributary from the south is the Ucayali. This magnificent stream originates near ancient Cusco and has a fall of 0.87 of a foot per mile, and a length nearly equal to that of the Negro. For 250 miles above its mouth, it averages half a mile in width, and has a current of 3 miles an hour. At Sarayacu, it is 20 feet deep. The Ucayali is navigable for at least 700 miles. The Morona, a steamer of 500 tons, has been up to the entrance of the Pachitea in the dry season, a distance of 600 miles, and in the wet season ascended that branch to Mairo. A small Peruvian steamer has recently ascended the Tambo to within 60 miles of Fort Ramon, or 773 miles from Nauta. Leaving the Ucayali, we pass by 6 rivers rising in the unknown lands of northern Bolivia: the Javari, navigable by steam for 250 miles, the sluggish Jutaí, half a mile broad and 400 miles long, the Juruá, 4 times the size of our Connecticut and navigable nearly its entire length, the unhealthy, little-known Tefé and Quari, and the Purus, a deep, slow river, over 1,000 miles long, and open to navigation halfway to its source. Soldan and Pinto claim to have ascended the Javari in a steamer about 1,000 miles, and it is said Chandlers went up the Purus 1,800 miles. The Tefé is narrow, with a strong current. Of all these 6 rivers, the Purus is the most important. It is probably the Amaru-Mayu, or Serpent River of the Incas, and its affluents enjoy the privilege of draining the waters of those beautiful Andes which form the eastern boundary of the empire of Manco Capac, and fertilizing the romantic valley of Paucar-Tambo, or Inn of the Flowery Meadow. The banks of this noble stream are now held by the untamable Chunchos, but the steam whistle will accomplish what the rifle cannot. The Purus communicates with the Madeira, proving the absence of rapids and of intervening mountains. 60 miles below the confluence of the Negro, the mighty Madeira, the largest tributary of the Amazon, blends its milky waters with the turbid king of rivers. It is about 2,000 miles in length. One branch, the Beni, rising near Lake Titicaca, drains the fertile valleys of Yungos and Apolo, rich in cinchona, chocolate, and gold. The Marmoré springs from the vicinity of Chuquisaca, within 15 miles of a source of the Paraguay, traversing the territory of the brave and intelligent Mochos, while the Ichinês washes down the gold and diamonds of Mato Grosso. Were it not for the cascade 480 miles from its mouth, large vessels might sail from the Amazon into the very heart of Bolivia. When full, it has a 3-mile current, and at its junction with the Amazon, it is 2 miles wide and 66 feet deep. 500 miles from its mouth, it is a mile wide and 100 feet deep. It contains numerous islands and runs in a comparatively straight course. It received its name from the vast quantity of driftwood often seen floating down. The value of Brazilian commerce with Bolivia by the Madeira was, in 1867, $43,000. At Santarém, the Amazon receives another great tributary, the Tapajós, or Rio Preto, as the Portuguese call it, 1,000 miles long, and for the last 80 miles, from 4 to 12 miles in breadth. It rises amid the glittering mines of Mato Grosso, only 20 miles from the headwaters of the Rio Plata, and flows rapidly down through a magnificent hilly country to the last cataract, which is 160 miles above Santarém, and is the end of navigation to sailing vessels. Thence to the Amazon it has little current and no great depth. From Santarém to Diamantino it is about 26 days' travel. Large quantities of sarsaparilla, rubber, tonka beans, mandioca, and guaraná are brought down this river. Parallel to the Tapajós, and about 200 miles distant, flows the Xingu. It rises in the heart of the empire, has the length of the Ohio and Monongahela, and can be navigated 150 miles. This is the last great tributary of the Amazon proper. If, however, we consider the Pará as only one of the outlets of the great river, we may then add to the list the Grand Tocantins. This splendid river has its source in the rich province of Minas, the source also of the São Francisco and Uruguay, not 600 miles from Rio de Janeiro, a region possessing the finest climate in Brazil, and yielding diamonds and rubies, the sapphire, topaz and opal, gold, silver, and petroleum. The Tocantins is 1,600 miles long and 10 miles broad at its mouth, but unfortunately rapids commence 120 miles above Cametá. The Araguaia, its main branch, is, according to Castle No, 1 mile wide, with a current of 3/4 of a mile an hour. Here are 6 tributaries, all of them superior to any river in Europe outside of Russia, save the Danube, and 10 times greater than any stream on the west slope of the Andes. While the Arkansas joins the Mississippi 400 miles above New Orleans, the Madeira of equal length enters the Amazon 900 miles from Pará. But, vast as are these tributary streams, they seem to make no impression on the Amazon. They are lost, like brooks in the ocean. Our ideas of the magnitude of the great river are wonderfully increased when we see the Madeira coming down 2,000 miles, yet its enormous contribution imperceptible halfway across the giant river, or the dark waters of the Negro creeping along the shore and becoming undistinguishable 5 miles from its mouth. Though the Amazon carries a larger amount of sediment than any other river, it has no true delta, the archipelago in its mouth, for, like our own St. Lawrence, it has its Bay of 1,000 Isles, not being an alluvial formation, but having a rocky base. The great island of Marajó, in physical configuration, resembles the mainland of Guiana. The deltoid outlet is confined to the tributaries, nearly all of them, like the disemboining Nile, emptying themselves by innumerable embouchures. To several tributaries, the Amazon gives water before it receives their tribute. Thus, by ascending the Negro 60 miles, we have the singular spectacle of water pouring in from the Amazon through the Guariba Channel. The waters of this great river system are of diverse tints. The Amazon, as it leaps from the Andes, and as far down as the Ucayali, is blue, passing into a clear olive green. Likewise the Pastaça, Huallaga, Tapajós, Xingu, and Tocantins. Below the Ucayali it is of a pale, yellowish olive. The Madeira, Purus, Juruá, Jutaí, Javari, Ucayali, Napo, Içá, and Japurá are of similar color. The Negro, Coari, and Tefé are black. Humboldt observes that a cooler atmosphere, fewer mosquitoes, greater salubrity, and absence of crocodiles, as also of fish, mark the region of these black rivers. This is not altogether true. The Amazon throughout is healthy, being swept by the trade winds. The branches, which are not so constantly refreshed by the ocean breezes, are occasionally malarious. The white water tributaries, except when they have a slack current in the dry season, have the best reputation, while intermittent fevers are nearly confined to the dark-colored streams. Much of the sickness on these tropical waters, however, is due to exposure and want of proper food, rather than to the climate. The river system of South America will favorably compare, in point of salubrity, with the river system of its continental neighbor. As we might expect, the volume of the Amazon is beyond all parallel. 500,000 cubic feet of water pour through the narrows of Óbidos every second, and fresh water may be taken up from the Atlantic far out of sight of land. The fall of the main easterly trunk of the Amazon is about 6½ inches per mile, equivalent to a slope of 21 minutes, the same as that of the Nile, and 1/3 that of the Mississippi. Below Jaén there are 30 cataracts and rapids. At the Pongo de Manseriche, at the altitude of 1,164 feet, according to Humboldt, it bids adieu to mountain scenery. Between Tabatinga and the ocean, the average current is 3 miles an hour. It diminishes toward Pará, and is everywhere at a minimum in the dry season, but it always has the swing of an ocean current. Though not so rapid as the Mississippi, the Amazon is deeper. There are 7 fathoms of water at Nauta, 2,200 miles from the Atlantic, 11 at Tabatinga, and 27 on the average below Manaus. The Amazon and its branches are subject to an annual rise of great regularity. It does not take place simultaneously over the whole river, but there is a succession of freshets. At the foot of the Andes, the rise commences in January. At Ega, it begins about the end of February. Coinciding with this contribution from the west, the October rains on the highlands of Bolivia and Brazil swell the southern tributaries, whose accumulated floods reach the mainstream in February. And the latter, unable to discharge the avalanche of waters, inundates a vast area and even crowds up the northern tributaries. As the Madeira, Tapajós, and Purus subside, the Negro, fed by the spring rains in Guyana and Venezuela, presses downward till the central stream rolls back the now sluggish affluents from the south. There is, therefore, a rhythmical correspondence in the rise and fall of the arms of the Amazon, so that this great freshwater sea sways alternately north and south, while the onward swell in the grand trunk is a progressive undulation eastward. As the Cambridge professor well says, in this oceanic river the tidal action has an annual instead of a daily ebb and flow. It obeys a larger orb, and is ruled by the sun and not the moon. As the southern affluents have the greatest volume, the Amazon receives its largest accession after the sun has been in the southern hemisphere. The rise is gradual, increasing to 1 foot per day. One lowland after another sinks beneath the flood. The forest stands up to its middle in the water, and shady dells are transformed into navigable creeks. Swarms of turtles leave the river for the inland lakes. Flocks of wading birds migrate to the banks of the Negro and Orinoco to enjoy the cloudless sky of the dry season. Alligators swim where a short time before the jaguar lay in wait for the tapir, and the natives, unable to fish, huddle in their villages to spend the winter of their discontent. The lower Amazon is at its minimum in September or October. The rise above this lowest level is between 7 and 8 fathoms. If we consider the average width of the Amazon 2 miles, we shall have a surface of at least 5,000 square miles raised 50 feet by the inundation. An extraordinary freshet is expected every 6th year. The Atlantic tide is perceptible at Óbidos, 450 miles above Pará, and Bates observed it up the Tapajós, 530 miles distant. The tide, however, does not flow up. There is only a rising and falling of the waters, the momentary check of the great river in its conflict with the ocean. The Bor, or Piroroco, is a colossal wave at springtide, rising suddenly along the whole width of the Amazon to a height of 12 or 15 feet, and then collapsing with a frightful roar. The Amazon presents an unparalleled extent of water communication. So many and far-reaching are its tributaries, it touches every country on the continent except Chile and Patagonia. South America is well nigh quartered by its river system. The Amazon starts within 60 miles of the Pacific. The Tapajós and Madeira reach down to the La Plata, while the Negro mingles its waters with those of the Orinoco. The tributaries also communicate with each other by intersecting canals, so numerous that central Amazonia is truly a cluster of islands. Wagons and railroads will be out of the question for ages hence in this aquatic basin. No other river runs in so deep a channel to so great a distance. For 2,000 miles from its mouth there are not less than 7 fathoms of water. Not a fall interrupts navigation on the main stream for 2,500 miles, and it so happens that, while the current is ever east, for even the ocean cannot send up its tide against it, there is a constant trade wind westward, so that navigation up or down has always something in its favor. As a general rule, the breeze is not so strong during the rise of the river. There are at least 6,000 miles of navigation for large vessels. It was lately said that the Mississippi carries more vessels in a month and the Yangtze-Kiang in a day than the Amazon all the year round. But this is no longer true. Steamers already ascend regularly to the port of Moyabamba, which is less than 20 days' travel from the Pacific coast. The Amazon was opened to the world September the 7th, 1867, and the time cannot be far distant when the exhaustless wealth of the Great Valley, its timber, fruit, medicinal plants, gums, and dyestuffs will be emptied by this great highway into the commercial lap of the Atlantic, when crowded steamers will plow all these waters, yellow, black, and blue, and the sloths and alligators, monkeys and jaguars, toucans and turtles will have a bad time of it. Officially free to the world, the great river is, however, for the present, practically closed to foreign shipping, as it is difficult to compete with the Brazilian steamers. For, by the contract which lasts till 1877, the company is allowed an annual subsidy of $4 million, which has since been increased by 250 mil-réis per voyage. In 1867, the steamers and sailing vessels on the Amazon were divided as follows, though it must be remembered that few of the foreign ships, excepting Portuguese, ascended beyond Pará. Nationality, United States, number 37, tonnage 39,901.5. Brazil, 49, tonnage 28,639. England, 52, 13,276.5. Portugal, 24, 7,871. France, 18, 5,344. Prussia, 4, 889.5. Holland, 3, 538. Denmark, 2, 525. Holstein, 3, 498. Norway, 1, 135. Spain, 1, 90. The vessels carrying the Stars and Stripes exported from Pará to the value of 3,235,073 mil-réis 950, or 8 times the amount carried by Brazilian craft, and 50,000 mil-réis more than England. While, therefore, the Imperial Company has the monopoly of trade on the Amazon, our ships distribute 1/3 of the products to the world. The United States is the natural commercial partner with Brazil, for not only is New York the halfway house between Pará and Liverpool, but a chip thrown into the sea at the mouth of the Amazon will float close by Cape Hatteras. The official value of exports from Pará in 1867 was 9,926,912 mil-réis 557, or above $5 million, an increase of 1 million over 1866. The early expeditions into the valley of the Amazon in search of the Gilded King are the most romantic episodes in the history of Spanish discovery. To the wild wanderings of these worshippers of gold succeeded the more earnest explorations of the Jesuits, those pioneers of geographical knowledge. Pinzon discovered the mouth of the river in 1500, but Orellana, who came down the Napo in 1541, was the first to navigate its waters. 20 years later, Aguirre descended from Cusco. In 1637, Teixeira ascended to Quito by the Napo. Cabrera descended from Peru in 1639. Juan de Palacios by the Napo in 1725. La Condamine from Jaén in 1744, and Madame Godin by the Pastaza in 1769. The principal travelers who preceded us in crossing the continent this century were Maw in 1828, Pepig in 1831, Smith in 1834, Font Chudi in 1845, Castelnau in 1846, Herndon and Gibbon in 1851, and Mark Hoy 1867, who came down through Peru, and a Spanish commission, Almagro, Spada, Martinez, and Isern, who made the Napo transit in 1865. To Spix and Marshes, 1820, Bates and Wallace, 1848 to 1857, Azevedo and Pinto, 1862 and 1864, and Agassi, 1865, the world is indebted for the most scientific surveys of the river in Brazil. Such is the Amazon, the mightiest river in the world, rising amid the loftiest volcanoes on the globe, and flowing through a forest unparalleled in extent. It only once, wrote Father Acunha, in order to surpass the Ganges, Euphrates, and the Nile in felicity, that its source should be in paradise. As if one name were not sufficient for its grandeur, it has three appellations: Maranhão, Solimões, and Amazon. The first apply to the part in Peru, the second to the portion between Tabatinga and Manaus, and the third to all below the Rio Negro. We have no proper conception of the vast dimensions of the thousand-armed river till we sail for weeks over its broad bosom, beholding it sweeping disdainfully by the great Madeira, as if its contribution was of no account, discharging into the sea 100,000 cubic feet of water per second more than our Mississippi, rolling its turbid waves thousands of miles, exactly as it pleases, ploughing a new channel every year, with tributaries 20 miles wide, and an island in its mouth twice the size of Massachusetts. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 19. The Valley of the Amazon, its physical geography, geology, climate, vegetation. From the Atlantic shore to the foot of the Andes, and from the Orinoco to the Paraguay, stretches the great valley of the Amazon. In this vast area, the United States might be packed without touching its boundaries. It could contain the basins of the Mississippi, the Danube, the Nile, and the Huangho. It is girt on three sides by a wall of mountains. On the north are the highlands of Guyana and Venezuela. On the west stand the Andes. On the south rise the tablelands of Mato Grosso. The valley begins at such an altitude that on the western edge vegetation differs as much from the vegetation at Pará, though in the same latitude, as the flora of Canada from the flora of the West Indies. The greater part of the region drained by the Amazon, however, is not a valley proper, but an extensive plain. From the mouth of the Napo to the ocean, a distance of 1,800 miles in a straight line, the slope is 1 foot in 5 miles. At Coca, on the Napo, the altitude is 850 feet, according to our observations. At Tinga Maria, on the Hualaga, it is 2,200, according to Herndon. At the junction of the Negro with the Cassiquiari, it is 400, according to Wallace. At the mouth of the Marmoré, it is 800, according to Gibbon. At the Pongo de Manseriche, below all rapids, it is 1,160, according to Humboldt. And at the junction of Araguaia with the Tocantins, it is 200, according to Castelnau. These barometrical measurements represent the basin of the Amazon as a shallow trough lying parallel to the equator, the southern side having double the inclination of the northern, and the whole gently sloping eastward. Furthermore, the channel of the great river is not in the center of the basin, but lies to the north of it. Thus, the hills of Almeirim rise directly from the river, while the first falls on the Tocantins, Xingu, and Tapajós are nearly 200 miles above their mouths. The rapids of São Gabriel, on the Negro, are 175 miles from the Amazon, while the first obstruction to the navigation of the Madeira is 100 miles farther from the great river. Of the creation of this valley we have already spoken. No region on the face of the globe of equal extent has such a monotonous geology. Around the rim of the basin are the outcroppings of a Cretaceous deposit. This rests on the hidden Mesozoic and Paleozoic strata, which forms the ribs of the Andes. Above it, covering the whole basin from New Granada to the Argentine Republic, are the following formations. First, a stratified accumulation of sand. Second, a series of laminated clays of diverse colors, without a pebble. Third, a fine, compact sandstone. Fourth, a coarse, porous sandstone, so ferruginous as to resemble bog iron ore. This last was originally 1,000 feet in thickness, but was worn down, perhaps, in some sudden escape of the pent-up waters of the valley. The table-topped hills of Almeirim are almost the sole relics. Finally, over the undulating surface of the denuded sandstone, an ochraceous, unstratified sandy clay was deposited. It is a question to what period this great accumulation is to be assigned. Humboldt called it Old Red Sandstone. Martius pronounced it New Red. Agassiz says drift, the glacial deposit brought down from the Andes and worked over by the melting of the ice which transported it. The professor further declares that these deposits are freshwater deposits. They show no sign of a marine origin. No seashells nor remains of any marine animal have as yet been found throughout their whole extent. Tertiary deposits have never been observed in any part of the Amazonian basin. This was true up to 1876. Neither Bates, Wallace, nor Agassiz found any marine fossil on the banks of the great river. But there is danger in building a theory on negative evidence. These explorers ascended no farther than Tabatinga. 200 miles west of that fort is the little Peruvian village of Pebas, at the confluence of the Ambiacu. We came down the Napo and Marañón and stopped at this place. Here we discovered a fossiliferous bed intercalated between the variegated clays so peculiar to the Amazon. It was crowded with marine tertiary shells. This was Pebas versus Cambridge. It was unmistakable proof that the formation was not drift, but tertiary, not of fresh, but salt-water origin. The species, as determined by W.M. Gabb, Esquire of Philadelphia, are Neritina pupa, Turbonilla minuscula, Messalia ortoni, Telina amazonensis, Pachydon obliqua, and P. tenua. All of these are new forms, excepting the first, and the last is a new genus. It is a singular fact that the Neritina is now living in the West India waters, and the species found at Pebas retains its peculiar markings. So that we have some ground for the supposition that not many years ago there was a connection between the Caribbean Sea and the upper Amazon. In other words, that Guiana has only very lately ceased to be an island. There is no mountain range on the watershed between the Orinoco and the Negro and Japurá, but the three rivers are linked by natural canals. Interstratified with the clay deposit are seams of a highly bituminous lignite. We traced it from near the mouth of the Curaray on the Rio Napo to Loreto on the Marañón, a distance of about 400 miles. It occurs also at Iquitos. This is further testimony against the glacial theory of the formation of the Amazonian valley. The paucity of shells in such a vast deposit is not astonishing. It is as remarkable in the similar accumulation of reddish argillaceous earth called Pampean mud, which overspreads the Rio Plata region. Some of the pampa shells, like those at Pebas, are proper to brackish water, and occur only on the highest banks. The Pampean formation is believed by Mr. Darwin to be an estuary or delta deposit. We will mention in this connection that silicified wood is found at the headwaters of the Napo. The Indians use it instead of flint, which does not occur there, in striking a light. Darwin found silicified trees on the same slope of the Andes as the Uspallata Pass. The climatology of the valley of the Amazon is as simple as its physical geography. There is no circle of the seasons as with us. Nature moves in a straight line. The daily order of the weather is uniform for months. There's very little difference between the dry and hot seasons. The former, lasting from July to December, is varied with showers, and the latter from January to June with sunny days, while the daily temperature is the same within 2 or 3 degrees throughout the year. On the watershed between the Orinoco and Negro, it rains throughout the year, but most water falls between May and November. the coolest season in that region. On the Middle Negro, the wet season extends from June 1st to December 1st and is the most sultry time. Comparatively few insects, birds, or beasts are to be seen in summer, but it is the harvest time of the inhabitants, who spend the glorious weather rambling over the playas and beaches, fishing and turtle hunting. The middle of September is the midsummer of the valley. The rainy season, or winter, is ushered in by violent thunderstorms from the west. It is then that the woods are eloquent with buzzing insects, shrill cicadas, screaming parrots, chattering monkeys, and roaring jaguars. The greatest activity of animal and vegetable life is in June and July. The heaviest rains fall in April, May, and June. Scarcely ever is there a continuous rain for 24 hours. Castelnau witnessed at Pebas a fall of not less than 30 inches in a single storm. The greatest amount noticed in New York during the whole month of September was 12.2 inches. The humidity of the atmosphere, as likewise the luxuriance of vegetation and the abundance and beauty of animal forms, increases from the Atlantic to the Andes. At the foot of the Andes, Pepig found that the most refined sugar in a few days dissolved into syrup, and the best gunpowder became liquid even when enclosed in canisters. So we found the Napo steaming with vapor. Fogs, however, are rarely seen on the Amazon. The animals and plants are not all simultaneously affected by the change of seasons. The trees retain their verdure through the dry verão, and have no set time for renewing their foliage. There are a few trees, like Mongruba, which drop their leaves at particular seasons, but they are so few in number they create the impression of a few dead leaves in a thick-growing forest. Leaves are falling and flowers drooping all the year round. Each species, and in some cases, each individual, has its own particular autumn and spring. There is no hibernation nor estivation, except by land shells. Birds have not one uniform time for nidification, and molting extends from February to May. Amazonia, though equatorially situated, has a temperate climate. It is cooler than Guinea or Guyana. This is owing to the constant evaporation from so much submerged land and the ceaseless trade winds. The mean annual temperature of the year is about 81 degrees. The nights are always cool. There are no sudden changes and no fiery dog days. Venereal and cutaneous affections are found among the people, but they spring from an irregular life. A traveler on the slow black tributaries may take the tertiana, but only after weeks of exposure. Yellow fever and cholera seldom ascend the river above Pará, and on the middle Amazon there are neither endemics nor epidemics, though the trades are feebly felt there, and the air is stagnant and sultry. According to Bates, swampy and weedy places on the Amazon are generally more healthy than dry ones. Whatever exceptions be taken to the branches, the main river is certainly as healthy as the Mississippi, the rapid current of the water and the continual movement of the air maintaining its salubrity. The few English residents, Mrs. Hislop, Jeffreys, and Hawkswell, who have lived here 30 or 40 years, are as fresh and florid as if they had never left their native country. The native women preserve their beauty until late in life. Great is the contrast between the gloomy winters and dusty summers, the chilly springs and frosty autumns of the temperate zone, and the perennial beauty of the equator. No traveler on the Amazon would exchange what Wallace calls the magic half-hour after sunset for the long gray twilight of the north. The man accustomed to this climate, wrote Herndon, is ever unwilling to give it up for a more bracing one. The mineral kingdom is represented only by sand, clay, and loam. The solid rock, except the sandstone already mentioned, begins above the falls on the tributaries. The precious gems and metals are confined to the still higher lands of Goiás, Mato Grosso, and the slopes of the Andes. The soil on the lower Amazon is sandy. On the Solimões and Maranhão, it is a stiff loam or vegetable mold, in many places 20 feet deep. Both in botany and zoology, South America is a natural and strongly marked division, quite as distinct from North America as from the Old World. And as there are no transverse barriers, there is a remarkable unity in the character of the vegetation. No spot on the globe contains so much vegetable matter as the valley of the Amazon. From the grassy steppes of Venezuela to the treeless pampas of Buenos Aires expands a sea of verdure, in which we may draw a circle of 1,100 miles in diameter, which shall include an evergreen, unbroken forest. There is a most bewildering diversity of grand and beautiful trees, a wild, unconquered race of vegetable giants, draped, festooned, corded, matted, and ribboned with climbing and creeping plants, woody and succulent, in endless variety. The exuberance of nature displayed in these million square acres of tangled, impenetrable forest offers a bar to civilization nearly as great as its sterility in the African deserts. A macheta is a necessary predecessor. The moment you land, and it is often difficult to get a footing on the bank, you are confronted by a wall of vegetation. Light lianas, starred with flowers, coil up the stately trees, and then hang down like strung jewels. They can be counted only by myriads, yet they are mere superfluities. The dense dome of green overhead is supported by crowded columns, often branchless for 80 feet. The reckless competition among both small and great adds to the solemnity and gloom of a tropical forest. Individual struggles with individual, and species with species, to monopolize the air, light, and soil. In the effort to spread their roots, some of the weaker sort, unable to find a footing, climb a powerful neighbor, and let their roots dangle in the air, while many a full-grown tree has been lifted up, as it were, in the strife, and now stands on the ends of its stilt-like roots, so that a man may walk upright between the roots and under the trunk. The mass of the forest on the banks of the great river is composed of palms, about 30 species, leguminous or pod-bearing trees, colossal nut trees, broad-leaved musaceae or bananas, and giant grasses. The most prominent palms are the architectural pupunha, or peach palm, with spiny stems, drooping, deep green leaves, and bunches of mealy, nutritious fruit; the slender açaí, with a graceful head of delicate green plumes; the ubuçu, with mammoth, undivided fronds; the stiff, serrated-leaved buçu, and gigantic mirici. One of the noblest trees of the forest is the maçaranduba, or cow tree, Prosimum galactodendron, often rising 150 feet. It is a hard, fine-grained, durable timber, and has a red bark and leathery, fig-like foliage. The milk has the consistency of cream, and may be used for tea, coffee, or custards. It hardens by exposure, so as to resemble gutta percha. Another interesting tree, and one which yields the chief article of export, is the caucho, or India rubber tree, Siphonia brasiliensis, growing in the lowlands of the Amazon for 1,800 miles above Pará. It has an erect, tall trunk, from 40 to 80 feet high, a smooth gray bark, and thick, glossy leaves. The milk resembles thick, yellow cream, and is colored by a dense smoke obtained by burning palm nuts. It is gathered between August and December. A man can collect 6 pounds a day, though this is rarely done. It is frequently adulterated with sand. The tree belongs to the same Epiphyllus family as our castor oil and the mandioca, while the tree which furnishes the caoutchouc of the East Indies and Africa is a species of ficus, and yields an inferior article to the rubber of America. Other characteristic trees are the mongruba, one of the few which shed their foliage before the new leaf buds expand, the giant samaúma, or silk cotton tree, called huimba in Peru, the calabash, or cuyeira, whose gourd-like fruit furnishes the cups used throughout the Amazon, the itaúba, or stonewood, furnishing ship timber as durable as teak, the red and white cedar used for canoes, not coniferous like the northern evergreen, but allied to the mahogany, the jacarandá, or rosewood, resembling our locust, palo de sangre, one of the most valuable woods on the river, huacapu, a very common timber, capirona, used as fuel on the steamers, and tawari, a heavy, close-grained wood, the bark of which splits into thin leaves, much used in making cigarettes. The piaçaba, a palm yielding a fiber extensively manufactured into cables and ropes, and exported to foreign countries for brushes and brooms, being singularly elastic, strong, and more durable than hemp, and the moira pinima, or tortoise-shell wood, the most beautiful wood in all Amazonia, if not in the world, grow up on the upper Rio Negro. A small willow represents the great catkin family. The valley is as remarkable for the abundance, variety, and value of its timber as for anything else. Within an area of half a mile square, Agassiz counted 117 different kinds of woods, many of them eminently fitted by their hardness, tints, and beautiful grain for the finest cabinet work. Enough palo de sangre or moira pinima is doubtless wasted annually to veneer all the palaces of Europe. While most of our fruits belong to the rose family, those of the Amazon come from the myrtle tribe. The delicious flavor for which our fruits are indebted to centuries of cultivation is wanting in many of the torrid productions. We prefer the sweetness of Pomona in temperate climes to her savage beauty in the sunny south. It is a curious fact, noticed by Herndon, that nearly all the valuable fruits of the valley are enclosed in hard shells or acid pulps. They also reach a larger size in advancing westward. The common Brazil nut is the product of one of the tallest trees in the forest, Bertholletia excelsa. The fruit is a hard, round shell, resembling a common ball, which contains from 20 to 24 nuts. 18 months are required for the bud to reach maturity. This tree, says Humboldt, offers the most remarkable example of high organic development. Akin to it is the sapucaia, or chicken's nuts, the Siti sapucaia, whose capsule has a natural lid and is called monkey's drinking cup. The nuts, about a dozen in number, are of irregular shape and much richer than the preceding. But they do not find their way to market, because they drop out of the capsule as soon as ripe and are devoured by peccaries and monkeys. The most luscious fruit of the Amazon is the Ada of Santarém. It has the color, taste, and size of the chirimoya, but the rind, which encloses a rich, custardly pulp, frosted with sugar, is scaled. Next in rank are the melting pineapples of Pará and the golden papayas, fully equal to those on the western coast. This is the original home of the cacao. It grows abundantly in the forests of the upper river, and particularly on the banks of the Madeira. The wild nut is smaller but more oily than the cultivated. The Amazon is destined to supply the world with the bulk of chocolate. The aromatic tonka beans, cumaru, used in flavoring snuff, and the Brazilian nutmegs, puxiri, inferior to the Ceylon, grow on lofty trees on the Negro and lower Amazon. The guaraná beans are the seeds of a trailing plant. From these the Malhés prepared the great medicine on the Amazon for diarrhea and intermittent fevers. Its active principle, caffeine, is more abundant than in any other substance, amounting to 5.07%, while black tea contains only 2.13. Coffee, rice, tobacco, and sugar cane are grown to a limited extent. Rio Negro coffee, if put into the market, would probably eclipse that of Ceará, the best Brazilian. Wild rice grows abundantly on the banks of the rivers and lakes. The cultivated grain is said to yield 40-fold. Most of the tobacco comes down from the Maranhão and Madeira. It is put up in slender rolls from 3 to 6 feet long, tapering at each end, and wound with palm fiber. The sugar cane is an exotic from southeastern Asia, but grows well. The first sugar made in the New World was by the Dutch in the island of St. Thomas in 1610. Farinha is the principal farinaceous production of Brazil. The mandioca, or cassava, manihot utilissima, from which it is made, is supposed to be indigenous, though it is not found wild. It does not grow at a higher altitude than 2,000 feet. Life and death are blended in the plant, yet every part is useful. The cattle eat the leaves and stalks, while the roots are ground into pulp, which, when pressed and baked, forms farinha, the bread of all classes. The juice is a deadly poison. 35 drops were sufficient to kill, in 6 minutes, a Negro convicted of murder. But it deposits a fine sediment of pure starch, that is the well-known tapioca, and the juice, when fermented and boiled, forms a drink. On the upper waters grow the celebrated coca, a shrub with small, light green leaves, having a bitter, aromatic taste. The powdered leaves, mixed with lime, form ipadu. This is to Peruvians what opium is to the Turk, betel to the Malay, and tobacco to the Yankee. 30 million pounds are annually consumed in South America. It is not, however, an opiate, but a powerful stimulant. With it, the Indian will perform prodigies of labor, traveling days without fatigue or food. Fonchudi considers its moderate consumption wholesome, and instances the fact that one coca chewer attained the good old age of 130 years, but when used to excess it leads to idiocy. The signs of intemperance are an uncertain step, sallow complexion, black-rimmed, deeply sunken eyes, trembling lips, incoherent speech, and stolid apathy. Coca played an important part in the religious rites of the Incas, and divine honors were paid to it. Even today the miners of Peru throw a quid of coca against the hard veins of ore, affirming that it renders them more easily worked, and the Indians sometimes put coca in the mouth of the dead to ensure them a welcome in the other world. The alkaloid, cocaine, was discovered by Vela. Flowers are nearly confined to the edges of the dense forest, the banks of the rivers and lagoons. There are a greater number of species under the equator, but we have brighter colors in the temperate zone. There is grandeur and sublimity in the tropical forest, wrote Wallace after 4 years of observation, but little of beauty or brilliancy of color. Perhaps the finest example of inflorescence in the world is seen in the Victoria regia, the magnificent water lily discovered by Schoenberg in 1837. It inhabits the tranquil waters of the shallow lakes which border the Amazon. The leaves are from 15 to 18 feet in circumference, and will bear up a child 12 years old. The upper part is dark, glossy green, the underside violet or crimson. The flowers are a foot in diameter, at first pure white, passing in 24 hours through successive hues from rose to bright red. This queen of water plants was dedicated to the queen whose empire is never at once shrouded in night. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton, Chapter 20. Life within the great river. Fishes, alligators, turtles, tortoises, and manatees. The Amazon is a crowded aquarium, holding representatives of every zoological class, Infusoria, hydras, fresh-water shells, chiefly Ampullaria, Melonia, and Unias, aquatic beetles, belonging mostly to new genera, fishes, reptiles, waterbirds, and cetaceans. The abundance and variety of fishes are extraordinary, so also are the species. This great river is a peculiar ichthyc province, and each part has its characteristics. According to Agassiz, the whole river, as well as its tributaries, is broken up into numerous distinct fauna. The pirarucu, or redfish, the Sudis gigas of science, is at once the largest, most common, and most useful fish. The Peruvian Indians call it paishi. It is a powerful fish, often measuring 8 feet in length and 5 in girth, clad in an ornamental coat of mail, its large scales being marginated with bright red. It ranges from Peru to Pará. It is usually taken by the arrow or spear. Salted and dried, the meat will keep for a year, and forms, with farinha, the staple food on the Amazon. The hard, rough tongue is used as a grater. Other fishes most frequently seen are the prettily spotted catfish, pescada, piranha, acará, which carries its young in its mouth, and a long, slender needlefish. There are ganoids in the river, but no sturgeons proper. Pickerel, perch, and trout are also wanting. The stingray represents the shark family. As a whole, the fishes of the Amazon have a marine character peculiarly their own. The reptilian inhabitants of this inland sea are introduced by numerous batrachians, water snakes, haliops, and anacondas. But alligators bear the palm for ugliness, size, and strength. In summer, the main river swarms with them. In the wet season, they retreat to the interior lakes and flooded forests. It was for this reason that we did not see an alligator on the Napo. At low water, they are found above the entrance of the Curaray. About Obidos, where many of the pools dry up in the fine months, the alligator buries itself in the mud and sleeps till the rainy season returns. It is scarcely exaggerating to say, writes Bates, that the waters of the Solimões are as well stocked with large alligators in the dry season as a ditch in England is in summer with tadpoles. There are 3 or 4 species in the Amazon. The largest, the jacaré-uaçu of the natives, attains a length of 20 feet. The jacaretinga is a smaller kind, only 5 feet long when full grown, and has the long, slender muzzle of the extinct Teleosaurus. The South American alligators are smaller than the crocodiles of the Nile or Ganges, and they are also inferior in rank. The head of the jacaré-uaçu, the ordinary species, is broad, while the gavial of India has a long, narrow muzzle, and that of the Egyptian lizard is oblong. The dentition differs. While in the Old World saurian the teeth interlock, so that the 2 jaws are brought close together, the teeth in the upper jaw of the Amazonian caiman pass by the lower series outside of them. The latter has, therefore, much less power. It has a ventral cuirass, as well as dorsal, and it is web-footed, while the crocodile has the toes free, another mark of inferiority. Sluggish on land, the alligator is very agile in its element. It never attacks men when on his guard, but it is cunning enough to know when it may do this with safety. It lays its eggs, about 20, some distance from the river bank, covering them with leaves and sticks. They are larger than those of Guayaquil, or about 4 inches long, of an elliptical shape, with a rough, calcareous shell. Negro vendors sell them cooked in the streets of Pará. Turtles are, perhaps, the most important product of the Amazon, not excepting the pirarucu. The largest and most abundant species is the tartaruga grande. It measures, when full grown, nearly 3 feet in length and 2 in breadth, and has an oval, smooth, dark-colored shell. Every house has a little pond, called curru, in the backyard, to hold a stock of turtles through the wet season. It furnishes the best meat on the upper Amazon. We found it very tender, palatable, and wholesome. But Bates, who was obliged to live on it for years, says it is very cloying. Every part of the creature is turned to account. The entrails are made into soup. Sausages are made of the stomach. Steaks are cut from the breast, and the rest is roasted in the shell. The turtle lays its eggs,
generally between midnight and dawn, on the central and highest part of the playas, or about 100 feet from the shore. The Indians say it will lay only where itself was hatched out. With its hind flippers it digs a hole 2 or 3 feet deep, and deposits from 80 to 160 eggs. Gibbon says from 150 to 200. These are covered with sand, and the next comer makes another deposit on the top, and so on until the pit is full. Egg-laying comes earlier on the Amazon than on the Napo, taking place in August and September. The tracajá, a smaller species, lays in July and August. Its eggs are smaller and oval, but richer than those of the great turtles. The mammoth tortoise of the Galapagos lays an egg very similar in size and shape to that of the tartaruga, but a month later, or in October. The hunting of turtle eggs is a great business on the Amazon. They are used chiefly in manufacturing oil, manteca, for illumination. Thrown into a canoe, they are broken and beaten up by human feet. Water is then poured in, and the floating oil is skimmed off, purified over the fire in copper kettles, and finally put up in 3-gallon earthen jars for the market. The turtles are caught for the table as they return to the river after laying their eggs. To secure them, it suffices to turn them over on their backs. The turtles certainly have a hard time of it. The alligators and large fishes swallow the young ones by hundreds. Jaguars pounce upon the full-grown specimens as they crawl over the playas, and vultures and ibises attend the feast. But man is their most formidable foe. The destruction of turtle life is incredible. It is calculated that 50 millions of eggs are annually destroyed. Thousands of those that escape capture in the egg period are collected as soon as hatched and devoured, the remains of yolk in their entrails being considered a great delicacy. An unknown number of full-grown turtles are eaten by the natives on the banks of the Marañón and Solimões and their tributaries, while every steamer, schooner, and little craft that descends the Amazon is laden with turtles for the tables of Manaus, Santarém, and Pará. When we consider also that all the mature turtles taken are females, we wonder that the race is not well nigh extinct. They are, in fact, rapidly decreasing in numbers. A large turtle, which 20 years ago could be bought for 50 cents, now commands $3. One would suppose that the males, being unmolested, would far outnumber the other sex, but Bates says they are immensely less numerous than the females. The male turtles, or capitaris, are distinguishable by their much smaller size, more circular shape, and the greater length and thickness of their tails. Near the Tapajós we meet a third species, called mata-mata. It has a deeply keeled carapax, beautifully bossed, and a hideous triangular head, having curious, lobed, fleshy appendages, and nostrils prolonged into a tube. It is supposed to have great virtues as a remedy for rheumatism. But the most noticeable feature of the Amazonian fauna, as Agassiz has remarked, is the abundance of cetaceans through its whole extent. From the brackish estuary of Pará to the clear, cool waters at the base of the Andes, these clumsy refugees from the ocean may be seen gambolling and blowing as in their native element. 4 different kinds of porpoises have been seen. The black species lives in the Bay of Marajó. In the middle Amazon are 2 distinct porpoises, one flesh-colored, and in the upper tributaries is the Inia boliviensis, resembling, but specifically different from the sea dolphin and the susu of the Ganges. It was several years, says the naturalist on the Amazon, before I could induce a fisherman to harpoon dolphins, butos, for me as specimens, for no one ever kills these animals voluntarily. The superstitious people believe that blindness would result from the use of the oil in lamps. The herbivorous manatee, already mentioned in chapter 15, is found throughout the great river. It differs slightly from the Atlantic species. It rarely measures over 12 feet in length. It is taken by the harpoon or nets of Chambiri twine. Both Herndon and Gibbon mention seals as occurring in the Peruvian tributaries, but we saw none, neither did Bates, Agassiz, or Edwards. They probably meant the manatee. End of chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton, Chapter 21. The forest of the Amazon is less full of life than the river. Beasts, birds, and reptiles are exceedingly scarce. Still there is, in fact, a great variety, but they are widely scattered and very shy. In the animal, as in the vegetable kingdom, diversity is the law. There is a great paucity of individuals compared with the species. Insects are rare in the dense forest. They are almost confined to the more open country along the banks of the rivers. Ants are perhaps the most numerous. There is one species over an inch long. But the most prominent, by their immense numbers, are the dreaded saúvas. Well-beaten paths branch off in every direction through the forest, on which broad columns may be seen marching to and fro, each bearing vertically a circular piece of leaf. Unfortunately, they prefer cultivated trees, especially the coffee and orange. They are also given to plundering provisions. In a single night, they will carry off bushels of farinha. They are of a light red color, with powerful jaws. In every formicarium, or ant colony, there are 3 sets of individuals, males, females, and workers. But the saúbas have the singularity of possessing 3 classes of workers. The light-colored mounds often met in the forest, sometimes measuring 40 feet in diameter by 2 feet in height, are the domes which overlie the entrances to the vast subterranean galleries of the saúba ants. These ants are eaten by the Rio Negro Indians and esteemed a luxury, while the Tapajós tribes use them to season their mandioca sauce. Akin to the vegetable-feeding saúbas are the carnivorous acetans, or foraging ants, of which Bates found 10 distinct species. They hunt for prey in large organized armies, almost every species having its own special manner of marching and hunting. Fortunately, the acetans choose the thickest part of the forest. The fire ant is the great plague on the Tapajós. It is small and of a shiny reddish color, but its sting is very painful, and it disputes every fragment of food with the inhabitants. All eatables and hammocks have to be hung by cords smeared with copaíba balsam. The traveler on the Amazon frequently meets with conical hillocks of compact earth, from 3 to 5 feet high, from which radiate narrow-covered galleries or arcades. The architects of these wonderful structures are the termites, or white ants, so called though they belong to a higher order of insects, widely differing from the true ants. The only thing in common is the principle of division of labor. The termite neuters are subdivided into 2 classes, soldiers and workers, both wingless and blind. Their great enemy is the ant-eater, but it is a singular fact, noticed by Bates, that the soldiers only attach themselves to the long worm-like tongue of this animal, so that the workers, on whom the prosperity of the termitarium depends, are saved by the self-sacrifice of the frightened caste. The office of the termites in the tropics seems to be to hasten the decomposition of decaying vegetation, but they also work their way into houses, trunks, wardrobes, and libraries. It is principally owing to their destructiveness, wrote Humboldt, that it is so rare to find papers in tropical America older than 50 or 60 years. Dragonflies are conspicuous specimens of insect life on the Amazon. The largest and most brilliant kinds are found by the shady brooks and creeks in the recesses of the forest, some of them with green or crimson bodies 7 inches long, and their elegant, lace-like wings tipped with white or yellow. Still more noticeable are the butterflies. There is a vast number of genera and species, and great beauty of dress, unequaled in the temperate zone. Some idea of the diversity is conveyed by the fact mentioned by Mr. Bates, that about 700 species are found within an hour's walk of Pará, and 550 at Ega, while the total number found in the British Islands does not exceed 66, and the whole of Europe supports only 300. After a shower in the dry season, the butterflies appear in fluttering clouds, for they live in societies, white, yellow, red, green, purple, black, and blue, many of them bordered with metallic lines and spots of a silvery or golden lustre. The sulphur yellow and orange-colored kinds predominate. A colossal morpho, 7½ inches in expanse, and visible a quarter of a mile off, frequents the shady glades. Splendid swallow-tailed papilios, green, rose, or velvety black, are seen only in the thickets, while the Hetaira esmeralda, with transparent wings, having one spot of a violet hue as it flies over the dead leaves in the dense forest, looks like a wandering petal of a flower. Very abundant is the heliconius, which plays such an important figure by its variations in Wallace's theory of the origin of species. On the Marañón we found Calidria seubule, a yellow butterfly common in Florida. The most brilliant butterflies are found on the middle Amazon, out of reach of the strong trade winds. The males far outnumber the other sex, are more richly colored, and generally lead a sunshiny life. The females are of dull hues, and spend their lives in the gloomy shadows of the forest. Caterpillars and nocturnal moths are rare. There are no true hive bees, Apides, in South America, but instead there are about 150 species of bees, mostly social moliponas, smaller than the European, stingless, and constructing oblong cells. Their colonies are much larger than those of the honeybee. The trigona occurs on the Napo. Unlike the melipona, it is not confined to the New World. A large sooty black bombus represents our humblebee. Shrill cicadas, bloodthirsty mantucas, piums, punkies, and mosquitoes are always associated in the traveler's memory with the glorious river. Of the last there are several kinds. The forest mosquito belongs to a different species from that of the town, being much larger and having transparent wings. It is a little cloud that one carries about his person every step on a woodland ramble, and their hum is so loud that it prevents one hearing well the notes of birds. The town mosquito has opaque, speckled wings, a less severe sting, and a silent way of going to work. The inhabitants ought to be thankful the big, noisy fellows never come out of the forest. Bates 2, 386. There are a few mosquitoes below Ega. Above that point a mosquito net is indispensable. Beetles abound, particularly in shady places, and are of all sizes, from that of a pin's head to several inches in length. The most noticeable are the gigantic megalosoma and enema, armed with horns. Very few are carnivorous. This is the more remarkable, observes Darwin, when compared to the case of carnivorous quadrupeds, which are so abundant in hot countries. Very few are terrestrial, even the carnivorous species being found clinging to branches and leaves. In going from the pole to the equator, we find that insect life increases in the same proportion as vegetable life. There is not a single beetle on Melville Island. 11 species are found in Greenland. In England, 2,500. In Brazil, 8,000. Here lives the king of spiders, the Mygale blondii, a monstrous hairy fellow, 5 inches long, of a brown color, with yellowish lines along its stout legs. Its abode is a slanting subterranean gallery about 2 feet in length, the sides of which are beautifully lined with silk. Other spiders barricade the walks in the forest with invisible threads. Some build nests in the trees and attack birds. Others again spin a closely woven web, resembling fine muslin, under the thatched roofs of the houses. Of land vertebrates, lizards are the first to attract the attention of the traveler of the equator. Great in number and variety, they are met everywhere, crawling up the walls of buildings, scampering over the hot, dusty roads, gliding through the forest. They stand up on their legs, carry their tails cocked up in the air, and run with the activity of a warm-blooded animal. It is almost impossible to catch them. Some of them are far from being the unpleasant-looking animals many people imagine, but in their coats of many colors, green, gray, brown, and yellow, they may be pronounced beautiful. Others, however, have a repulsive aspect and are a yard in length. The iguana, peculiar to the New World tropics, is covered with minute green scales handed with brown, though it changes its color like the chameleon, and has a serrated back and gular pouch. It grows to the length of 5 feet and is arboreal. Its white flesh and its oblong, oily eggs are considered great delicacies. We heard of a lady who kept one as a pet. Frogs and toads, the chief musicians in the Amazonian forest, are of all sizes, from an inch to a foot in diameter. The bufogigas is of a dull gray color and is covered with warts. Tree frogs, Gila, are very abundant. They do not occur on the Andes or on the Pacific coast. Their quack-quack, drum-drum, hoo-hoo is one of our pleasant memories of South America. Of snakes there is no lack, and yet they are not so numerous as imagination would make them. There are 150 species in South America, or 1/2 as many on the same area as in the East Indies. The diabolical family is led by the boa, while the rear is brought up by the amphisbaenas, or double-headed snakes, which progress equally well with either end forward, so that it is difficult to make head or tail of them. The majority are harmless. The deadly coral is found on both sides of the Andes, and wherever there is a cacao plantation. One of the most beautiful specimens of the venomous kind is a new species, Elaps imperator, Kolb, which we discovered on the Marañon. It has a slender body, more than 2 feet in length, with black and red bands margined with yellow, and a black and yellow head with permanently erect fangs. We have already mentioned the most common birds. Probably, says Wallace, no country in the world contains a greater variety of birds than the Amazonian valley. But the number does not equal the expectations of the traveler. He may ramble a whole day without meeting one. The rarity, however, is more apparent than real. We forget, for the moment, the vastness of their dwelling place. The birds of the country, moreover, are gregarious, so that a locality may be deserted and silent at one time, and swarming with them at another. Parrots and toucans are the most characteristic groups. To the former belong true parrots, paroquets, and macaws. The first are rarely seen walking, but are rapid flyers and expert climbers. On the trees they are social as monkeys, but in flight they always go in pairs. The paroquets go in flocks. The hyacinthine macaw, the araruna of the natives, is one of the finest and rarest species of the parrot family. It is found only on the south side of the Amazon. The macaw was considered sacred by the Maya Indians of Yucatan and dedicated to the sun. The Quichuans called it guacamayo, guaca meaning sacred. Of toucans there are many species. The largest is the toco, with a beak shaped like a banana. The most beautiful are the curb-crested or Beauharnais toucans, and the P. flauirostris, whose breast is adorned with broad belts of red, crimson, and black. Wherefore such a beak? Every naturalist has asked, but the toucan still wags his head as much as to say, you cannot tell. There must be some other reason than adaptation. Birds of the same habits are found beside it. The ibis, pigeon, spoonbill, and toucan are seen feeding together. How astonishing are the freaks and fancies of nature, wrote the funny Sydney Smith. To what purpose, we say, is a bird placed in the woods of Cayenne with a bill a yard long, making a noise like a puppy dog, and laying eggs in hollow trees? The toucan, to be sure, might retort, to what purpose are certain foolish, prating members of Parliament created, pestering the House of Commons with their ignorance and folly, and impeding the business of the country? There is no end to such questions, so we will not enter into the metaphysics of the toucan. On the flooded islands of the Negro and Upper Amazon is found the rare and curious umbrella bird, black as a crow, and decorated with a crest of hairy plumes and a long lobe suspended from the neck, covered with glossy blue feathers. This latter appendage is connected with the vocal organs and assists the bird in producing its deep, loud, and lengthy fluty note. There are 3 species. Another rare bird is the uruponga or campanero, in English the tolling bell bird, found only on the borders of Guyana. It is of the size of our jay, of a pure white color, with a black tubercle on the upper side of the bill. Orpheus himself, says Waterton, would drop his lute to listen to him, so sweet, so novel and romantic is the call of the pretty snow-white campanero. The campanero may be heard 3 miles, echoes Sydney Smith, this single little bird being more powerful than the belfry of a cathedral ringing for a new dean. It is impossible to contradict a gentleman who has been in the forests of Cayenne, but we are determined, as soon as a campanero is brought to England, to make him tall in a public place and have the distance measured. But the most remarkable songster of the Amazonian forest is the realejo, or organ bird. Its notes are as musical as the flageolet. It is the only songster, says Bates, which makes any impression on the natives. Besides those are the jacamars, peculiar to Equatorial America, stupid, but of the most beautiful golden, bronze, and steel colors; sulky trogons with glossy green backs and rose-colored breasts; long-toed jassanas, half water, half fowl; the rich, velvety purple and black Amphocoelus jacapa, having an immense range from Archidona to Pará; the gallinaceous yet arboreal ciganas, scarlet ibises, smaller but more beautiful than their sacred cousins of the Nile; stilted flamingos, whose ochreness is atoned for by their brilliant red plumage; glossy black mutuns or Curaçao turkeys; ghostly storks, white egrets, ash-colored herons, black ducks, barbets, kingfishers, sandpipers, gulls, plovers, woodpeckers, orioles, tanagers, essentially a South American family, and, excepting 3 or 4 species, found only east of the Andes; wagtails, finches, thrushes, doves, and hummers. The last, by Western Indians living sunbeams named, are few, and not to be compared with the swarms in the Andean valleys. The birds of the Amazon have no uniform time for breeding. The majority, however, build their nests between September and New Year's, and rarely lay more than 2 eggs. Amazonia, like Australia, is poor in terrestrial mammals, and the species are of small size. Nearly the only game a hunter can depend upon for food, besides toucans and macaws, is peccary. 1 species of tapir, to represent the elephants and rhinoceroses of the Old World; 3 small species of deer, taking the places of deer, antelopes, buffaloes, sheep, and goats of the other continent; 3 species of large felidae; 1 peccary and a wild dog, with opossums, anteaters, armadillos, sloths, squirrels, the only rodents which approach ours, Capybaras, pacas, agoutis, and monkeys comprise all the quadrupeds of equatorial America. The last two are the most numerous. Marsupial rats take the place of the insectivorous mammals. Of ant-eaters, there are at least 4 distinct species, but they are scattered sparingly and are seldom found on the low flooded lands. 4 or 5 species of armadillo inhabit the valley. These little nocturnal burrowing edentates are the puny representatives of the gigantic glyptodon of Pleistocene times, and the sloths are the dwindling shadows of the lordly megatherium. There are 2 species of 3-toed sloths, one inhabiting the swampy lowlands, the other confined to the terra firma land. They lead a lonely life, never in groups, harmless and frugal as a hermit. They have 4 stomachs, but not the long intestines of ruminating animals. They feed chiefly on the leaves of the trumpet tree, Cecropia, resembling our horse chestnut. The natives, both Indian and Brazilian, hold the common opinion that the sloth is the type of laziness. The capybara, or honsoco, the largest of living rodents, is quite common on the riverside. It is gregarious and amphibious, and resembles a mammoth guinea pig. Pacas and agoutis are most abundant in the lowlands, and are nocturnal. These semi-hoofed rodents, like the toxodon of old, approach the pachyderms. The tapir, or grand bestia, as it is called, is a characteristic quadruped of South America. It is a clumsy-looking animal, with a tough hide of an iron-gray color, covered with a coat of short coarse hair. Its flesh is dry, but very palatable. It has a less powerful proboscis than the Malay species. M. Poulain distinguishes another species from the mountains, which more nearly resembles the Asiatic. The tapir, like the condor, for an unknown reason is not found north of 8 degrees north, though it wanders as far south as 40 degrees. We met but one species of peccary, the white-lipped, D. labiatus. It is much larger than the Mexican hog, and, too thick-headed to understand danger, is a formidable antagonist. The raposa is seen only on the middle Amazon, and very rarely there. It has a long tapering muzzle, small ears, bushy tail, and grayish hair. It takes to the water, for the one we saw at Tabatinga was caught while crossing the Amazon. Fawn-colored pumas, spotted jaguars, black tigers, tiger cats, all members of the graceful feline family, inhabit all parts of the valley, but are seldom seen. The puma, or panther, is more common on the Pacific side of the Andes. The jaguar is the fiercest and most powerful animal in South America. It is marked like the leopard, roses of black spots on a yellowish ground, but they are angular instead of rounded, and have a central dot. There are also several black streaks across the breast, which easily distinguish it from its transatlantic representative. It is also longer than the leopard. Indeed, Humboldt says he saw a jaguar whose length surpassed that of any of the tigers of India which he had seen in the collections of Europe. The jaguar frequents the borders of the rivers and lagoons, and its common prey is the capybara. It fears the peccary. The night air is alive with bats of many species, the most prominent one being the Disopes ferotis, which measures 2 feet from tip to tip of the wings. If these cheiropters are as impish as they look, and as bloodthirsty as some travellers report, it is singular that Bates and Waterton, though residing for years in the country, and ourselves, though sleeping for months unprotected, were unmolested. About 40 species of monkeys, or 1/2 of the newel forms, inhabit the valley of the Amazon. Wallace, in a residence of 4 years, saw 21 species, 7 with prehensile and 14 with non-prehensile tails. They all differ from the apes of the other hemisphere. While those of Africa and Asia, Europe has only one, have opposable thumbs on the forefeet as well as hind, uniformly 10 molar teeth in each jaw, as in men, and generally cheek pouches and naked callosities, the American monkeys are destitute of the two latter characteristics. None of them are terrestrial like the baboon. All, save the marmosets, have 24 molars. The thumbs of the forehands are not habitually opposed to the fingers. One genus, Atelis, the imperfect, is thumbless altogether. The nostrils open on the sides of the nose instead of beneath it, as in the gorilla, and the majority have long prehensile tails. They are inferior in rank to the anthropoids of the Old World, though superior to the lemurs of Madagascar. They are usually grouped in two families, marmosets and Sibaiger. The former are restless, timid, squirrel-like Lilliputs. One species is only 7 inches long, with tails not prehensile, in the case of the scarlet-faced nearly wanting. The barigudos, or gluttons, Lagothrix, are the largest of American monkeys, but are not so tall as the quaitas. They are found west of Manaus. They have more human features than the other monkeys, and, with their woolly gray fur, resemble an old Negro. There are 3 kinds of howlers, misetes, the red or mono colorado of Humboldt, the black, and the M. Beelzebub, found only near Pará. The forest is full of these surly, untamable guaribas, as the natives call them. They are gifted with a voice of tremendous power and volume, with which they make night and day hideous. They represent the baboons of the Old World in disposition and facial angle, 30 degrees, and the gibbons in their yells and gregarious habits. The sapajus, cebus, are distributed throughout Brazil, and have the reputation of being the most mischievous monkeys in the country. On the west coast of South America there are at least 3 or 4 species of monkeys, among them a black howler and a Cebus capucinus. The coitas, or spider monkeys, are the highest of American quadrumana. They are slender-legged, sluggish, and thumbless, with a most perfectly prehensile tail, terminating in a naked palm, which answers for a 5th hand. The Indians say they walk under the limbs like the sloth. They are the most common pets in Brazil, but they refuse to breed in captivity. Both coitas and barigudos are much persecuted for their flesh, which is highly esteemed by the Indians. Mr. Bates has called our attention to the arboreal character of a large share of the animals in the Amazonian forest. All the monkeys and bats are climbers, and live in the trees. Nearly all the carnivores are feline, and are therefore tree-mounters, though they lead a terrestrial life. The plantigrade Cercoleptes has a long tail, and is entirely arboreal. Of the edentates, the sloth can do nothing on the ground. The gallinaceous birds, as the cigana and curassow, the pheasant and turkey of the Amazon, perch on the trees, while the great number of arboreal frogs and beetles is an additional proof of the adaptation of the fauna to a forest region. Even the epiphytous plants sitting on the branches suggest this arboreal feature in animal life. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 22. We come now to the genus Homo. Man makes a very insignificant figure in the vast solitudes of the Amazon. Between Manaus and Pará, the most densely peopled part of the valley, there is only 1 man to every 4 square miles, and the native race takes a low place in the scale of humanity. As the western continent is geologically more primitive than the eastern, and as the brute creation is also inferior in rank, so the American man, in point of progress, seems to stand in the rear of the Old World races. Both the geology and zoology of the continent were arrested in their development. Vegetable life alone has been favored. The aboriginal American, wrote von Martius,
is at once in the incapacity of infancy and unpliancy of old age. He unites the opposite poles of intellectual life. We will not touch the debatable ground of the red man's origin, nor inquire whether he is the last remains of a people once high in civilization. But we are tempted to express the full belief that tropical America is not his center of creation. He is not the true child of the tropics, and he lives as a stranger, far less fitted for its climate than the Negro or Caucasian. Yet a little while, and the race will be as extinct as the dodo. He has not the supple organization of the European, enabling him to accommodate himself to diverse conditions. Among the Andean tribes there are seldom over 5 children, generally but 1 in a family. And Bates, speaking of Brazilian Indians, says, "Their fecundity is of a low degree, and it is very rare to find a family having so many as 4 children." While it is probable that Mexico was peopled from the north, it is very certain that the Tupi and Guarani, the long-headed hordes that occupied eastern South America, came up from the south, moving from the Paraguay to the banks of the Orinoco. From the Tupi nation, perhaps a branch of the Guarani, sprung the multitudinous tribes now dwelling in the vast valley of the Amazon. In such a country, unbroken by a mountain, uniform in climate, we need not look for great diversity. The general characters are these: skin of a brown color, with yellowish tinge, often nearly the tint of mahogany; thick, straight black hair; black horizontal eyes; low forehead, somewhat compensated by its breadth; beardless, of the middle height but thick-set; broad, muscular chest; small hands and feet; incurious, unambitious, impassive, undemonstrative, with a dull imagination and little superstition, with no definite idea of a supreme being, few tribes having a name for God, though one for the demon, with no belief in a future state, and accepting civility with virtues all negative. The semi-civilized along the lower Amazon, called Tupuyos, seem to have lost, in the language of Wallace, the good qualities of savage life, and gained only the vices of civilization. There are several hundred different tribes in Amazonia, each having a different language. Even the scattered members of the same tribe cannot understand each other. This segregation of dialects is due, in great part, to the inflexibility of Indian character, and has isolated a narrow round of thought and life. When and where the Babel existed, whence the many branches of the great Tupi family separated, we know not. We only know that though different in words, these languages have the same grammatical construction. In more than one respect, the polyglot American is antipodal to the Chinese. The language of the former is richest in words, that of the latter the poorest. The preposition follows the noun, and the verb ends the sentence. Ancient Tupi is the basis of the língua geral, the intertribal tongue on the middle Amazon. The semi-civilized Ticunas, Mundurucus, etc., have one costume, the men in trousers and white cotton shirts, the women in calico petticoats, with short, loose chemises, and their hair held in a knot on the top of the head by a comb, usually of foreign make, but sometimes made of bamboo splinters. The wild tribes north and south go nearly or quite nude, while those on the western tributaries wear cotton or bark togas or ponchos. The habitations are generally a framework of poles, thatched with palm leaves, the walls sometimes latticed and plastered with mud, and the furniture chiefly hammocks and earthen vessels. The Mundurucus are the most numerous and warlike tribe in Amazonia. They inhabit both banks of the Tapajós, and can muster, it is said, 2,000 fighting men. They are friendly to the whites, and industrious, selling to traders large quantities of farina, sarsaparilla, rubber, and tonka beans. Their houses are conical or quadrangular huts,
sometimes open sheds, and generally contain many families. According to Wallace, the Mundurucus are the only perfectly tattooed nation in South America. It takes at least 10 years to complete the tattooing of the whole person. The skin is pricked with spines, and then the soot from burning pitch rubbed in. Their neighbors, the Pararahuaches, are intractable, wandering savages, roaming through the forest and sleeping in hammocks slung to the trees. They have delicately formed hands and feet, an oval face, and glistening black eyes. On the west side of the Tapajós, near Vila Nova, are the Maurés, an agricultural tribe, well formed, and of a mild disposition. On the lower Madeira are the houseless, formidable Araras, who paint their chins red with achote, an addo, and usually have a black tattooed streak on each side of the face. They have long made the navigation of the great tributary hazardous. Above them dwell the Parintintins, light-colored and finely featured, but nude and savage. In the labyrinth of lakes and channels at the mouth of the Madeira live the lazy, brutal Muras, the most degraded tribe on the Amazon. They have a darker skin than their neighbors, an extraordinary breadth of chest, muscular arms, short legs, protuberant abdomens, a thin beard, and a bold, restless expression. They pierce the lips and wear peccary tusks in them in time of war. The Indians on the Purus live generally on the communal principle, and are unwarlike and indolent. The Purupurus bury in sandy beaches, go naked, and have one wife. On the great northwest tributary of the Rio Negro, the Wacaiari, there are numerous tribes, collectively known as the Waupés. They have permanent abodes in shape of a parallelogram, with a semicircle at one end, and of a size to contain several families, sometimes a whole tribe. One of them, Wallace informs us, was 115 feet long by 75 broad and about 30 high. The walls are bullet-proof. Partitions of palm leaves divide it into apartments for families, the chief occupying the semicircular end. The men alone wear clothes and ornaments, but both sexes paint their bodies with red, black, and yellow colors in regular patterns. The men have a little beard, which they pull out, as also the eyebrows, and allow the hair to grow unshorn, tying it behind with a cord and wearing a comb, while the women cut theirs and wear no comb. They are an agricultural people, peaceable, ingenious, apathetic, diffident, and bashful. The Catauixés inhabit the banks of the Tefé. They perforate the lips and wear rows of sticks in the holes. At the mouth of the Juruá are the uncivilized but tall, noble-looking Marauás. They pierce the ears and lips and insert sticks. They live in separate families and have no common chief. Above them live the treacherous Arauás. On the opposite side of the Amazon are the nearly extinct Passéis and Juris, the finest tribes in Central America. They are peaceable and industrious, and have always been friendly to the whites. The Passéis are a slenderly built, light-colored, dignified, superior race, distinguished by a large square tattooed patch in the middle of the face. The Juris tattoo in a circle round the mouth. Nearby are the Wainambeus, or hummingbirds, distinguished by a small blue mark on the upper lip. Higher up the Japurá is the large cannibal tribe of Miranhas, living in isolated families, and on the Tocantins dwell the low Caixanas, who kill their firstborn children. Along the left bank of the Amazon, from Loreto to Japurá, are the scattered houses and villages of the Tucunas. This is an extensive tribe, leading a settled agricultural life, each horde having a chief and a medicine-man, or priest of their superstitions. They are good-natured and ingenious, excelling most of the other tribes in the manufacture of pottery, but they are idle and debauched, naked except in the villages, and tattooed in numbers of short, straight lines on the face. The Marubus on the Javari
have a dark complexion and a slight beard, and on the west side of the same river roam the Mageronas, fierce, hostile, light-colored, bearded cannibals. In the vicinity of Pebas dwell the inoffensive Yaguas. The shape of the head, but not their vacant expression, is well represented by Catlin's portrait of Black Hawk, a Sauk chief. They are quite free from the encumbrance of dress, the men wearing a girdle of fibrous bark around the loins, with bunches looking like a mop hanging down in front and rear, and similar bunches hung around the neck and arms. The women tie a strip of brown cotton cloth about the hips. They paint the whole body with achote. They sometimes live in communities. One large structure with Gothic roof is used in common, on the inside of which, around the walls, are built family sleeping rooms. The Yaguas are given to drinking and dancing. They are said to bury their dead inside the house of the deceased and then set fire to it, but this conflicts with their communal life. Perhaps, with the other tribes on the Japurá, Issa, and Napo, they are fragments of the great Omagua nation, but the languages have no resemblance. Of the Oriente Indians we have already spoken. The tall, finely built Cucamas near Nauta are shrewd, hard-working canoe-men, notorious for the singular desire of acquiring property, and the Yameos, a white tribe, wander across the Marañón as far as Sarayacu. On the Ucayali are numerous vagabond tribes, living for the most part in their canoes and temporary huts. They are all lazy and faithless, using their wives, polygamy is common, as slaves. Infanticide is practiced, that is, deformed children they put out of the way, saying they belong to the devil. They worship nothing. They bury their dead in a canoe or earthen jar under the house, which is vacated forever, and throw away his property. The common costume is a long gown called kushma, of closely twilled cotton, woven by the women. Their weapons are two-edged battle-axes of hard wood, as palo de sangre, and bows and arrows. The arrows, 5 or 6 feet long, are made from the flower stalk of the arrow-grass, Cunarium, the head pointed with the flinty chonta and tipped with bone, often anointed with poison. At the base, 2 rows of feathers are spirally arranged, showing the Indians' knowledge of the rifle principle. When they have fixed abodes, several families live together under one roof, with no division separating the women, as among the Red Indians on the Pastaza. The roof is not over 10 feet from the ground. The Piros are the highest tribe. They have but one wife. The Conibus are an agricultural people, yet cannibals, stretching from the upper Ucayali to the sources of the Purus. They are a fair-looking, athletic people, and, like the Shipibus, of 10 wear a piece of money under the lip. The Campas are the most numerous and warlike. They are little known, as travelers give them a wide berth. Herndon fancied they were the descendants of the Inca race. They are said to be cannibals, and from the specimen we saw, we should judge them uncommonly sharp. He was averse to telling us anything about his tribe, but turned our questions with an equivocal repartee and a laugh. The Cachibos on the Pachitea is another cannibal tribe. They are light-colored and bearded. The dwarfish, filthy Himus alone of the Ucayali Indians tattoo, though not so perfectly as the Mundurucus, using black and blue colors. The other tribes simply paint. It was among these wild Indians on the Ucayali that the Franciscan friars labored so long and zealously, and with a success far greater and more lasting than that which attended any other missionary enterprise in the valley. The remaining inhabitants of the Amazon are mixed breeds, Negroes and whites. The amalgamations form the greater part of the population of the large towns. Von Tschudi gives a catalogue of 23 hybrids in Peru, and there are undoubtedly as many or more in Brazil. The most common are Mamelucos, offspring of white with Indian, mulattoes from white and Negro, Cafusos or Zambos from Indian and Negro, Curibocos from Cafuso and Indian, and Chibaros from Cafuso and Negro. To define their characteristics correctly, says von Tschudi, would be impossible, for their minds partake of the mixture of their blood. As a general rule, it may be said that they unite in themselves all the faults without any of the virtues of their progenitors. As men, they are generally inferior to the pure races, and as members of society, they are the worst class of citizens. Yet they display considerable talent and enterprise, as in Quito, a proof that mental degeneracy does not necessarily result from the mixture of white with Indian blood. There is, however, confesses Bates, after 10 years' experience, a considerable number of superlatively lazy, tricky, and sensual characters among the half-castes, both in rural places and in the towns. Our observations do not support the opinion that the result of amalgamation is a vague compound, lacking character and expression. The moral part is perhaps deteriorated, but in tact and enterprise they often excel their progenitors. Negroes are to be seen only on the lower Amazon. By the new act of emancipation, such as our slaves continue so, but their children are free. Negroes born in the country are called Creoles. Of the white population, save a handful of English, French, and German, the Portuguese immigrants are the most enterprising men on the river. They are willing to work, trade, or do anything to turn a penny. Those who acquire a fortune generally retire to Lisbon. The Brazilians proper are the descendants of the men who declare themselves free and independent of the mother country. Few of them are of pure Caucasian descent, for the immigration from Portugal for many years has been almost exclusively of the male sex. It is generally considered bad taste in Brazil to boast purity of descent. Bates 1, 241. Brazilians are stiff and formal, yet courteous and lively, communicative and hospitable, well-bred and intelligent. They are not ambitious, but content to live and enjoy what nature spontaneously offers. The most a Brazilian wants is farina and coffee, a hammock and a cigar. Brazilian ladies have led a dreary life of constraint and silence, without education or society, the husband making a nun of his wife after the old bigoted Portuguese notion. But during the last 20 years the doors have opened. Brazil attained her independence in 1823, Brazilian women in 1848. Here, in this virgin valley, where every plant is an evergreen, possessing the most agreeable and enjoyable climate in the world, with a brilliant atmosphere, rivaled only by that of Quito, and with no changes of seasons, here we may locate the paradise of the lazy. Life may be maintained with as little labor as in the Garden of Eden. Perhaps no country in the world is capable of yielding so large a return for agriculture. Nature, evidently designing this land as the home of a great nation, has heaped up her bounties of every description, fruits of richest flavors, woods of finest grain, dyes of gayest colors, and drugs of rarest virtues, and left no sirocco or earthquake to disturb its people. Providence, moreover, has given the present emperor a wise and understanding heart, and the government is a happy blending of imperial dignity and republican freedom. White, Negro, half-caste, and Indian may be seen sitting side by side on the jury bench. Certainly the nation cannot be a despicable one whose best men are able to work themselves up to positions of trust and influence. God bless the Empire of the South. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 23.
How to travel in South America. Routes, expenses, outfit, precautions, dangers. The most vague and incorrect notions prevail in respect to traveling in South America. The sources of trustworthy and desirable information are very meager. Murray has not yet published a handbook for the Andes. Routes, methods, and expenses of travel are almost unknown, and the imagination depicts vampires and scorpions, tigers and anacondas, wild Indians and fevers without end, impassable rivers and inaccessible mountains as the portion of the tourist. The following statements, which can be depended upon, may therefore be acceptable to those who contemplate a trip on the Andes and the Amazon. The shortest, cheapest, most feasible, and least interesting route across the continent is from Valparaiso to Buenos Aires. The breadth of South America is here only 800 miles. By railroad, from Valparaiso to the foot of the Andes. Thence a short mule ride by the Uspallata Pass, altitude 12,000 feet, under the shadow of Aconcagua to Mendoza. Thence by coach across the Pampas to the Rio Plata. The Portillo Pass, traversed by Darwin, is nearer, but more lofty and dangerous. Bolivia offers the difficult path of Gibbon, from the coast to Cochabamba, thence down the Marmoré and Madeira. There are 3 routes through Peru. First, from Lima to Mairo, by way of Cerro Pasco and Huánuco, by mule, 10 days. Thence down the Pachitea, by canoe, 6 days. Thence down the Ucayali to Iquitos, by steamer, 6 days, 45 hours running time. When the road from Lima to Mairo is finished, the passage will be shortened 4 days. No snow is met in crossing the Andes in summer, but in winter it is very deep. Second, Herndon's route, from Lima to Tinga Maria, by way of Huánuco, by mule, 15 days, distance 300 miles. The passage is difficult in the rainy season. Thence by canoe 15 days down the Huallaga to Yurimaguas. Third, and best, by mule from Trujillo to Cajimarca, 5 days. Note the magnificent ruins. Then to Chachapoyas, 7 days. Here are pre-imperial relics. Thence to Moyabamba, 8 days. Thence on foot to Balsa Puerto, 4 days. Thence by canoe to Yurimaguas, 2 days. Price of a mule from Trujillo to Moyabamba is $30. Canoe hire, $10. The Peruvian steamers arrive at Yurimaguas the 5th of every month and leave the 7th. Reach Nauta the 9th and Iquitos the 10th. Leave Iquitos the 16th and arrive at Tabatinga the 19th to connect with the Brazilian line. Going up, they leave Tabatinga the 21st and arrive at Iquitos the 24th, stopping 6 days. Running time from Yurimaguas to Tabatinga, 48 hours. Fare, $70 gold. Third class, $17. La Condamines route, via Loja and the Marañón, is difficult, and Madame Gaudin's, via the Pastaza, is perilous on account of rapids and savages. The transit by the Napo we will now give in detail. $600 in gold will be amply sufficient for a first-class passage from New York to New York across the continent of South America, making no allowance for stoppages. For necessary expenses in Ecuador, take a draft on London, which will sell to advantage in Guayaquil. So will Mexican dollars. American gold should be taken for expenses on the Amazon in Brazil. At Pará, it commands a premium. On the Marañón, it is below par. Peruvian gold should therefore be bought at Guayaquil for that part of the route. Also French medios, or quarter francs. They will be very useful everywhere on the route, especially on the upper Amazon, where change is scarce. $50 worth will not be too many, for, as the Scotchman said of sixpences, they are canny little dogs, and often do the work of shillings. Take a passport for Brazil. Leave behind your delicacies and superfluities of clothing. Woolen clothes will be serviceable throughout. A trunk for mountain travel should not exceed 24 by 15 by 15 inches, smaller the better. Take a rubber air pillow and mattress, There's no bed between Guayaquil and Pará. A hammock for the Amazon can be bought on the Napo. The Pacific Mail steamships, which leave New York on the 1st and 16th of each month, connect at Panama without delay with the British Steam Navigation Line on the South Pacific. Fare, first class, from New York to Guayaquil by way of Panama and Paita, $215 gold, second class $128. Time to Panama 8 days, to Paita 4 days, to Guayaquil 1 day. A coasting steamer leaves Panama for Guayaquil the 13th of each month. There are 2 so-called hotels in Guayaquil. Los Tres Mosqueteros, kept by Senor Gonzalez, is the best. Take a front room, $1 per day, and board at the Fonda Italiana or La Santa Rosa, $1 per day. Here, complete your outfit for the mountains. Saddle with strong girth and crupper, saddlebags, saddle cover, sweat cloth, and bridle, $4 paper. Woolen poncho, $9. Rubber poncho, $4. Blanket, $6. Leggings, native spurs and stirrups, knife, fork, spoon, teapot, chocolate. Tea, pure and cheap, should be purchased at Panama. Candles, matches, soap, towels, and tarpaulin for wrapping up baggage. Convert your draft into paper, quantum sufficit, for Guayaquil, the rest into silver. Besides this outer outfit, an inner one is needed, of patience without stint. You will soon learn that it is one thing to plan and quite another to execute. To get out of the inn is one half of the journey, is very appropriately a Spanish proverb. Spaniards do nothing depressado, in a hurry, but everything mañana, tomorrow. You will find fondas, horses, and roads divided into the bad, the worse, and the worst, and bad is the best. But fret not thyself. Serenity of mind, wrote Humboldt, almost the first requisite for an undertaking in inhospitable regions, passionate love for some class of scientific labor, and a pure feeling for the enjoyment which nature in her freedom is ready to impart, are elements which, when they meet together in an individual, ensure the attainment of valuable results from a great and important journey. The journey to Quito must be made between May and November. In the rainy season, the roads are impassable. From Guayaquil to Bodegas by Yankee steamer, fare $2, time 8 hours. At Bodegas, hire beasts at the Consignacion for Guaranda. Price for riding and cargo beasts $4 each. No extras for the arriero. A mule will carry 250 pounds. Buy bread at Bodegas and Guaranda. The Indians on the road are very loth to sell anything. Buy a fowl, therefore, at the first opportunity, or you will have to live on dirty potato soup and be glad of that. At the tambos or wayside inns, you pay only for yerba, fodder. Never unsaddle your beast till it is cool. An Indian will even leave the bridle on for a time. To Guaranda, 3 full days. There, take mules, safer than horses in climbing the mountains, for Quito. $6.25 silver per beast. Time, 5 days. Be sure to leave Guaranda by 4 a.m., for in the afternoon Chimborazo is swept by furious winds. Also, start with a full stomach. You will get nothing for 2 days. Drink sparingly of the snow water which dashes down the mountains. You will be tempted to curse Chuquipoyo, but thank heaven it is no worse. There are 2 hotels in Quito, French and American. The former has the better location, the latter the better rooms. Best front room furnished $50 a day, cheaper by the month. Meals, 25 cents each. The beef is excellent, but the cuisine, oh, onions. God sends the meat and the evil one cooks. You can hire a professional male cook, Indian, for $5 a month, but you can't teach him anything. Fish is not to be had in Quito. Gibbon speaks of having some in Cusco, but does not tell us where it came from. Price of best flour, $3.60 per quintal. Butter, 30 cents a pound. Beef, $1 in arroba, 25 pounds. Refined sugar, $3.50 in arroba. Brown sugar, rapadura, 5 cents a pound. Cigars, from 6 to 16 for a dime. Cigarettes, 5 cents a hundred. Horse hire, from 50 cents to $1 per day. If you are to remain some time, buy a beast. A good mule costs $40, an ordinary horse $50.
The post office department is a swindle. If you pay through, you will find on your arrival home that your letters have been paid at both ends. Ask our consul at Guayaquil to forward them. The necessary preparations for the Napo journey have been given in a previous chapter, chapter 11. We might add to the list a few cans of preserved milk from New York, for you will not see a drop between the Andes and the Atlantic. Fail not to take plenty of lienzo. You must have it to pay the Indians, and any surplus can be sold to advantage. A bale of 30 varas costs about $50. Rely not at all on game. A champion sharpshooter could not live by his rifle. Santa Rosa and Coca will be represented to you as small New Yorks, but you will do well if you can buy a chicken between them. From Quito to Papayacta, 2 days and a half. Riding beast, $12 silver, and $1.20 for each cargo of 3 arrobas. At Papayacta, hire Indians for Archidona. Each carries 3 arrobas and wants $5 silver in advance. You take to your feet. Time 9 days, including 1 day of rest at Baeza. At Archidona, you take a new set of peons for Napo at 25 cents apiece. Time 1 day. From Napo down the river to Santa Rosa, 1 day. You give 2.5 varas of lienzo to each Indian, and the same for the canoe. From Santa Rosa to Pebas on the Marañón, 15 days. Cost of an Indian, 25 varas. Ditto for a canoe. We advise you to stop at Coca and rig up a raft or craft of some kind. We ascribe our uninterrupted good health to the length and breadth of our accommodations. The Peruvian steamer from the west arrives at Pebas on the 16th of each month. Fare to Tabatinga, $15 gold. Time 4 days. Running time 11 hours. Brazilian steamer leaves Tabatinga the 20th of each month. Fare to Manaus, $44.44 gold. Time 5 days. Distance 1,000 miles. From Manaus to Pará, $55.55 gold. Time 6 days. Distance 1,000 miles. The Brazilian steamers make semi-monthly trips. We found 2 hotels in Pará. The Italiana, dear and poor. The Giana, unpretending but comfortable. Charges at the latter for room and board $2 a day. The best time for traveling on the Amazon is between July and December. The United States and Brazilian steamships on their homeward voyage call at Pará the 7th of each month. Fare to New York, $150 gold, the same as down the whole length of the Amazon. Second class, $75. Time, 14 days. Distance by way of St. Thomas, 1,610 plus 1,400 miles. Steamer for Rio the 9th of each month. Fare, $125. Time, 12 days. Distance, 2,190 miles. Fare from Rio to New York, $200. Fare by sailing vessel from Pará to New York, from $50 to $75. Time, 3 weeks. A British steamer from Rio stops at Pará and Lisbon. A word about health. First, take 1 grain of common sense daily. Do as the natives do. Keep out of the noonday sun, and make haste slowly. Secondly, take with you quinine in 2 grain pills, and begin to take them before leaving New York, as the great African traveler Du Chaillu recommended us. As preventive against the intermittent fevers on the lowlands and rivers, nothing is better than Dr. Copeland's celebrated pills: quinine 12 grains, camphor 12 grains, cayenne pepper 12 grains. Mix with mucilage and divide into 12 pills. Take 1 every night or morning as required. On the Amazon, carry guaraná. Woolen socks are recommended by those who have had much experience of tropical fevers. Never bathe when the air is moist. Avoid a chill. A native will not bathe till the sun is well up. Rub yourself with aguardiente, native rum, after a bath, and always when caught in a shower. Freely exercise in Quito to ward off liver complaints. Drink little water. Coffee or chocolate is better, and tea is best. Avoid spirits with fruit, and fruit after dinner. The sickliest time in Guayaquil is at the breaking up of the rainy season. As to dangers. First, from the people. Traveling is as safe in Ecuador as in New York, and safer than in Missouri. There are no Spanish banditti,
though some places, as Chambo, near Riobamba, bear a bad name. It is not wise to tempt a penniless footpad by a show of gold, but no more so in Ecuador than anywhere. We have traveled from Guayaquil to Damascus, but have never had occasion to use a weapon in self-defense, and only once for offense, when we threatened to demolish an Arab sheik with an umbrella. Secondly, from brutes. Some travelers would have us infer that it is impossible to stir in South America without being affectionately entwined by a serpent, or sprung upon by a jaguar, or bitten by a rattlesnake. Jiggers in every sand-heap, and scorpions under every stone. The Edinburgh Review, 43-310. Padre Bernassa speaks of meeting a serpent 2 yards in diameter, but you will be disappointed at the paucity of animal life. We were 2 months on the Andes, August and September, before we saw a live snake. They are plentiful in the wet season in cacao plantations, but the majority are harmless. Dr. Russell, who particularly studied the reptiles of India, found that out of 43 species which he examined, not more than 7 had poisonous fangs, and Sir E. Tennant, after a long residence in Ceylon, declared he had never heard of the death of an European by the bite of a snake. It is true, however, that the number and proportion of the venomous species are greater in South America than in any other part of the world, but it is some consolation to know that, zoologically, they are inferior in rank to the harmless ones. And certainly, adds Sidney Smith, a snake that feels 14 or 15 stones stamping on his tail has little time for reflection, and may be allowed to be poisonous. If bitten, apply ammonia externally immediately, and take 5 drops in water internally. It is an almost certain antidote. The discomforts and dangers arising from the animal creation are no greater than one would meet in traveling overland from New York to New Orleans. Finally, of one thing the tourist in South America may be assured, that dear to him, as it is to us, will be the remembrance of those romantic rides over the Cordilleras, amid the wild magnificence of nature, the adventurous walk through the primeval forest, the exciting canoe life on the Napo, and the long, monotonous sail on the waters of the great river. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of the Andes and the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton. Chapter 24. In Memoriam. A life that all the muses decked with gifts of grace that might express all-comprehensive tenderness, all subtilizing intellect. Tennyson. On the east of the city of Quito is a beautiful and extensive plain, so level that it is literally a tableland. It is the classic ground of the astronomy of the 18th century. Here the French and Spanish academicians made their celebrated measurement of a meridian of the earth. As you stand on the edge of this plain just without the city, you see the dazzling summit of Cayambe looking down from the north. On your left are the picturesque defiles of Pichincha. On your right, the slopes of Antisana. Close by you, standing between the city and the plain, is a high white wall enclosing a little plot, like the city above, Foursquare. You are reminded by its shape, and also by its position relative to Quito and Pichincha, of that other sacred enclosure just outside the walls of Jerusalem and at the foot of Olivet, the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the Protestant cemetery. Through the efforts of our late representative, now also numbered with the dead, this place was assigned by the government for the interment of foreigners who do not die in the Romish faith. And there we buried our fellow traveler, Colonel Phineas Staunton, the artist of the expedition and Vice-Chancellor of Ingham University, New York. On the 8th of September, 1867, we bore him through the streets of Quito to this quiet resting place, without parade and in solemn silence, just as we believe his unobtrusive spirit would have desired,
and just as his Saviour was carried from the cross to the sepulchre. No splendid hearse or nodding plumes, no long procession, save the unheard tread of the angels, no requiem, save the unheard harps of the seraphs. We gave him a Protestant Christian burial, such as Quito never saw. In this corner of nature's vast cathedral, the secluded shrine of grandeur and beauty not found in Westminster Abbey, we left him. We parted with him on the mount which is to be the scene of his transfiguration. It would be difficult for an artist to find a grave whose surroundings are so akin to his feelings. He lies in the lofty lap of the Andes, and snow-white pinnacles stand around him on every side, just as we imagine the mountains are around the city of God. We think we hear him saying, as Fanny Campbell Butler said of another burial ground, "I will not rise to trouble any one if they will let me sleep here. I will only ask to be permitted, once in a while, to raise my head and look out upon this glorious scene." No dark and dismal fogs gather at evening about that spot. It lies nearer to heaven than any other Protestant cemetery in the world. It is good, says Beecher, to have our mortal remains go upward for their burial, and catch the earliest sounds of that trumpet which shall raise the dead. And the day is coming when that precious vein of gold that now lies in the bosom of the mighty Andes shall leave its rocky bed and shine in sevenfold purity. Indeed, the artist is already in that higher studio among the mountains of Beulah. A simple sculptured obelisk of sorrow stands over the dust of Colonel Staunton. His most fitting monument is his own life-work. He was the very painter Humboldt longed for in his writings. The artist who, studying nature's great hothouse, bounded by the tropics, should add a new and more magnificent kingdom of nature to art. Colonel Staunton, true and lovely in his own character, was ever seeking in nature for whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are pure, and now was about to add whatsoever things are grand. He was a Christian artist, in sympathy with such men as Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci. The habitual choice of sacred subjects, says Ruskin, implies that the painter has a natural disposition to dwell on the highest thoughts of which humanity is capable. No shallow or false person could have conceived his ascension. Only the highest qualities of the intellect and heart, a soul already half ascended, could have given such ethereal lightness to those two men in white apparel. Only the pure in heart see God. As we revisit in imagination the spot where he sleeps so well, we behold, in the calm sublimity of the mountains that surround his grave, an image of the undisturbed repose of his spirit on the Rock of Ages. End of chapter 24. End of The Andes and the Amazon by James Orton.